I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Enfield Board of Education, September 29, 2020, 7 p.m. in our brand new town council chambers. Thank you for the buildings and grounds for the excellent job they did to get us here, and thank you for all for being present. We'll start with invocation, a moment of silence by Mr. LeBlanc. Please rise.
Dear Lord, tonight we ask that you guide us into understanding what unites us rather than what divides us as we navigate through challenging times and embark on the heart of an upcoming election and first presidential debate tonight. May we always remember we are Americans before we are anything else. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge of allegiance.
Please.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless America. Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Fire evacuation, we have one exit out of the chambers, to the rear of the chambers, down the stairs, and out to the front parking lot. Can we have roll call, please?
Mr. LeBlanc?
Here.
Mrs. LeBlanc?
Here.
Mr. Ryder?
Here.
Mr. Salazar?
Here.
Mrs. Thurston?
Here.
Mr. Unghire?
Here.
Mrs. Costa?
Here.
Mrs. Hall?
Here.
Chairman Kruzel?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being present to our comeback meeting. We have no board guests tonight, so we'll go right into number 7, Superintendent's Report, EPS School Update. Mr. Drezek, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to do my best to adhere to the same requirements we ask our students and our staff to wear masks all the time, but for the public interest while I'm speaking, I'm just going to take it off. So obviously this has been a busy last few days with the entire Enfield Public Schools community. And I wanted to take this opportunity now that we're obviously, first of all, it's nice to see everybody again. It's been, about 7 months that we've all been that we're all able to be in the same room again. But obviously with updates that you've received and media reports that you've seen around some of the school closures that we unfortunately were forced to make, I wanted to take this opportunity to do the best I could to explain to the public the rationale behind that, and not only to the board members, but for those audience members that we have, and in particular, and those who are watching at home. Please, I just want to start that shutting a school down for any reason, whether it be snow or unfortunately, a situation during a pandemic is something that I take very seriously. But I think it's important for the public to know, because I have gotten a lot of questions over the past few days as to what goes into the decision, and there is some conflicting information that might be floating out there. So I'll try to, as best I can and as quickly as I can, explain to those who are watching what goes behind some of those decisions. And the first thing I wanted to clarify is that there's been a lot of questions over the past few days with regards to the feet rule, meaning 3 feet versus 6 feet. So just to clarify for those who may not understand, and I'm not trying to diminish anyone because I didn't understand this fully when we started, the state guidelines require us to have children 3 feet apart from each other while they're in schools. Although the CDC recommendation is that, as we are here this evening, people maintain the distance of 6 feet. And as we went through this entire summer and the planning to reopen schools, albeit full-time, hybrid as we are, or ultimately remotely if we ever were forced to that, we were always operating under the guidance from the state of Connecticut, which dictated that we'd have to have a minimum of 3 feet in between students. Now, the state of Connecticut did recommend 6 feet when feasible, but they said that because they knew that 6 feet wasn't feasible in most cases, in particular in crowded schools. So our planning and design for full-time students was with that 3-foot parameter in mind. Because we opened up in a hybrid model, we've been fortunate where we're able to place desks in classrooms that are 6 feet apart from each other. That gets into the question of what happened last week. And as you heard, we did have 3 positive COVID-19 cases within the Enfield Public Schools community, 2 at Enfield High School and 1 at Henry Barnard School. Once we're notified that there is a positive case in the community, we immediately have to begin our contact tracing protocols. Now, one of the things that we talked a lot about over the summer, and we talked amongst all of you on Microsoft Teams, was that we have the protocols in place, but the reality is until you actually go through the process and actually have to initiate it, it becomes, you don't really know what to expect until you live it like anything else. I can say that our process did work, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned in the process that we experienced over the past few days. One of the lessons that we didn't calculate, and I've talked to colleagues who've had to go through similar experiences that none of us really calculated, was the length of time that the contact tracing protocols can take. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment. But just so that the public is aware, when we are notified that there is an official positive case, the first phone call that I make is to our Director of Public Health. At that point, we begin the contact tracing protocol. And really what that is notifying anyone who can be deemed a close contact of that infected person. And I also understand there might be some confusion within the school community of, was I in contact with someone if I was with someone who may have been with that person? The answer is no. The answer is a close contact is defined by someone who that was within 6 feet of the infected person and spent 15 minutes or more with them. Now, I understand there's some gray areas. Is it 14 minutes? Does that still count? Is it 6 feet? Maybe it was 5'9", or maybe it was 6'1". Those are all factors that we have to take into consideration when we're notifying direct contacts. But that's how the process begins. We start immediately looking at where that person or persons would have been in the school community, albeit in a building, in a bus, and outside of a building, wherever we're notified of that person potentially was. We start that process of notifying anyone who can be deemed a close contact of that person. Once we start, when we first designed this protocol, it sounds pretty easy on paper to say you start gathering up the information that we have, such as class lists, contact lists, even looking at seating arrangements if it's in a particular classroom, and you start notifying people that may be within the close contact of that person. The one thing that we didn't necessarily factor in when we're building the plans, there wasn't a definite time on how long this process would take, but we factored in that each phone call would be about 5 minutes or so, because you have to call somebody, inform them. At that point, you have to inform them that they were in close contact with an infected person. That doesn't mean they have it, but that means we have to notify them. And we also have to get information from those people that we're contacting to find out where we weren't always there in every circumstance. So we do need to gather information from folks that may be in close contact. And we have to start that notification process. During that process, and I keep referencing things that we didn't necessarily account for, and again, this is all just based on timing, is when you make that phone call, one of the things that you have to understand, and we've learned this now with our experience doing this 3 times, is that we don't know how long that initial call or any of those calls are going to take. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, and I think this is the most important, when you make that initial phone call to someone to notify them that they were a close contact of someone who was tested positive, you have to take a step back for a moment and realize what that person on the other end of the line is experiencing. For us, planning things out, talking about protocols, talking about this for the last 6 months, it almost becomes mundane. It becomes very real for all of us when we have to start notifying people that, yes, you were in contact with someone who tested positive. You also have to take into consideration that as soon as you say that to someone on the other line, they're not listening to anything else you're saying during that phone call. And that's understandable. And that was the reason why, as we've heard throughout this process, that things take a little bit longer, because immediately the person on the other end of the line is thinking, I got it. Who was I in contact with? What does this mean for my own family? What does this mean for a loved one who may be vulnerable? The process of, okay, we just need you to tell us who you may have been with, who else may have been near you, all that's information we have to gather from them, we're not going to necessarily get on the first try, which is totally understandable. But nobody factored that in when we were putting plans together, that these 5-minute phone calls we thought would make and we can check off the list are turning into 30, 40, 50-minute phone calls for good reason, because we have to put people's mind at ease that we're doing everything we can to protect them. So that was one of the reasons that in some of these cases, it took a little bit longer for us to actually notify everyone that we were required to notify of the possible exposure. I also want to clarify, if I can, the difference between self-quarantining and self-isolating. Self-quarantining is if you are a direct contact of someone who is positive, essentially you can't come here, you really need to stay home, but you don't have to lock yourself in a room necessarily and not have any contact with anyone on the outside world. Now, we can recommend that until you're cleared, but we can't necessarily force that. Self-isolation is different in the sense, and if our Director of Public Health is watching this, I will allow her to fact check me and I will send it all out to you guys tomorrow, but I'm trying to reiterate what she shared with me for the public to hear. Self-isolation is if you are the identified positive person, then that means exactly what it sounds like. Then you have to self-isolate. That means you should be in a room by yourself with no contact for anyone for 14 days, as well as a negative test. We've gotten questions from people who have been called close contacts or been notified that they're close contacts that have said, what if I get a test and I'm negative? Do I still have to quarantine for 14 days? And the answer is yes. Again, I didn't make these rules up. These are the ones that they've given us. But if you are notified you're in a close contact and we notify you that you have to self-quarantine for 14 days, that means you have to self-quarantine for 14 days. Even if you produce a negative test, that doesn't matter. And according to the Director of Public Health, that doesn't mean you're not possibly still infected or you cannot possibly still be infected. So we have gotten a lot of staff members who have reached out and said, I got myself a test, I'm okay, can I come back? And the answer, unfortunately, at this point is no. I do want to also clarify, because I'm getting a lot of questions with regards to tests, the difference between the quick or the rapid test and the full-fledged test. The rapid tests are good for peace of mind, but all they really do, from what I'm being told, is they confirm whether you're positive or not. If you get a negative rapid test, doesn't necessarily mean you're not positive, but it doesn't mean you are. So the recommendation that we've been getting from the health department was, if people do want to get that rapid test and at least give them some peace of mind that they're testing negative, they can, but we can't take that as the only indication that they are indeed negative. We still need the full test. And I know there's been some communication with me regarding what type of test would be acceptable. But in the event we have to notify anyone that they were indeed in close contact with a person who is deemed positive, they have to remain in self-quarantine for 14 days. And although we can't force people to get tested, we highly recommend that they do, more so for peace of mind for them and for their own families, because we realize that that person on the other line isn't just a student or a staff member. That's another person, that's another family member, that's somebody else who is now scared to death that they've contracted this. So we have been sharing our recommendations that people can get tests. What we do is we recommend that you contact your primary care physician immediately and explain to them what had happened. But we also try to follow up with everyone either the best we can, or we also work in partnership with the health department to do follow-up with anyone who might be affected. I also want to share with the public part of the rationale for decision-making when it comes to timing. And I think this is important because I have gotten a lot of questions about, well, why did you make this decision then? So the reality is, with any school closure decision, but most importantly for this one, if I'm informed that we have a positive case in our community, my number one obligation is to make sure that we are in contact with anyone who would be deemed a close contact before I let anyone else step into one of our schools. And in the case with our first case of last Wednesday, again, it was the perfect storm. It was the high school, which is not in cohorts. It has our largest population, and we were notified at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon of a remote day. How that was even more confusing was if it happened when everyone was in school, that gave us the opportunity to reach people a little bit easier and maybe call them down to the office and have these conversations. But by the time we had the actual confirmation, it was after nobody was obviously in the buildings. And at the point when we actually had confirmation, everyone had already wrapped up the remote day for that point, and everyone probably had enough screen time and shut their devices off, which I don't blame them. But the reality was we needed to get a hold of everybody to find out how many people we were dealing with. At that point, it was about 4 in the afternoon. And just so people will understand, the cutoff for me to make a decision about school the following day for the high school is 6 o'clock at night. Because by the time I draft the letters, get the robocall out, and by the time we get everything up and running, that call will probably go out no later than 7:30 at night. I don't think it's fair for anyone, for a student, for a family, for a parent, or for a staff member, for me to be calling their house at 9 o'clock at night. Not everybody stays up as late as I do, and sometimes people don't listen to those messages. So I always tried, the latest I would send a call home to the high school would be 7:30, and shave an hour off of that for any of the elementary families. So the window we had to make a decision was between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. So I needed to know by 6 p.m., did we reach every single person who was possibly in contact with the infected person? And the answer was no. I did not know that with 100% certainty. So I had to make the decision on Wednesday evening to not only close for Thursday, but because we were having such a difficult time getting a hold of the people that we knew at the time we needed to get a hold of, I wasn't confident that we would have that process completed on Thursday either. Now, time has proven us correctly, because when you're dealing with an instance at a high school, we actually had to rely, and I want to thank both staffs, most importantly, the Enfield High and the Henry Barnard staff, and Aaron and Connell and Laura and all the deans and our nurses, and Jim Graham and Allison Law and all the staff members at Henry Barnard, who did an absolutely remarkable job during these unbelievably crazy circumstances. It's bad enough that it happened, but when you're the first one and then you're the first elementary school, it's even worse. And really what got us through it was the calm demeanor and the reassurance that when we were making those phone calls, that those leaders in those buildings did for the parents and for the staff. But when I had to make that decision, I knew that at come 6 o'clock, I wasn't going to have all the information that I needed and that we needed as a school to open on Thursday and most likely on Friday. To be completely transparent, because it was at the high school and there were so many different people potentially involved, the administration actually had to go into Enfield High on Thursday and go to the security cameras to make sure we knew where people were going and where they were. And in addition, I had to make sure that our buildings and ground staff, although they had just thoroughly cleaned the building on Wednesday, that they had to go and do it all over again. And thank you to Mark Garr and Donald Nunes and Ken Keto, who went repeatedly over the weekend and cleaned the building 6 or 7 times just to make sure. So that's part of the reason why when some will say, well, the governor said you don't have to close a school if you only have one case. And I've made it, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful in any way. He did say that, and that could be true, but that's not true in every case. And what we've learned in 3 cases that we've had here in Enfield, every case is uniquely different. And we're going to have to react to every case on what's in the best interest of that community at the time with the information that we have. That said, while we were still dealing with trying to gather up information and notify everyone at Enfield High School about what we had found out the previous evening, about 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, I received a phone call that indeed we had another case over at Henry Barnard School. Again, every case is unique. I will share with you that when I first informed Patrice on Wednesday of our case at Enfield High School, and my mind began to race about all the things that we needed to do, and okay, this is real now, it's happening, we have to respond appropriately, and we can't screw this up. The one thing that Patrice did share with me was, aren't you glad you don't have the entire student population there right now? Because if you did, you wouldn't be open for a while. And what we've learned over the past few days is she was 100% correct. Ironically, on Tuesday afternoon, Patrice had sent a notice to all the superintendents in our area, a notice that for those of you who are considering going back full time, it was her recommendation that if you haven't experienced a contact tracing experience at this point, that she really recommended that we do a tabletop exercise because you don't want to do it for the first time when all your kids are back. I think she jinxed it because, again, within 24 hours, we had our first case. But that said, while we're notifying contacts, it's also important for everyone to realize what that means. That means, again, if you're within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. Now, we're fortunate at the high school and at Henry Barnard at the time because we're in a hybrid model, our student desks are situated 6 feet apart. But what that doesn't mean is that if a student inadvertently, innocently, walked into a classroom at Enfield High School, and when he or she went to get into the seat, they moved the desk 3 inches. If they move the desk 3 inches, they're not 6 feet away anymore. And that counts. So those are some of the decisions. I think people need to understand that when you're investigating and contact tracing, it's like you're doing a full-fledged investigation into where people were, who they talked to, who was near there, and you have to make sure that, you know, every I is dotted and every T is crossed. What made the Henry Barnard situation unique was not only the circumstances and the fact that it happened with, you know, a primary school, was that as we were contact tracing and notifying all the people that were required to be notified, we actually got to the end of the day. And as I said, my cutoff was 5 o'clock to make the decision on whether or not we can conduct school the next day. Principal Graham, as all you know, as I said, we were very fortunate to have Jimmy Graham being the first one to make phone calls to put people's mind at ease, because as I said, when you make that phone call, the person on the other end is scared, and as they should be. But when Jim called me and said, I have one more call to make, it was about 4 o'clock, and then we'll regroup and figure out what we're going to do. And Jim called me back about half hour later and said, as only Jim Graham can, all right, boss man, we're not done yet. And what happens is when you talk to someone, that could potentially open the door to have to talk to another person, and in some cases, 2 people. And going back to what I said earlier, when you first call someone and try to confirm where they were or who they were with, they're not thinking rationally at the moment. But after an hour or so, when people start to, you know, gather themselves again, then they start to realize, oh, wait a minute, you might want to talk to this person. And that's what we began to experience. What we also experienced was about that time that not only did I not have 100% certainty that we had gotten everyone, I also didn't have 100% certainty that we can properly staff the building on Friday for in-person learning. The reality is that the more people that we have that are out either in self-quarantine or out because we've asked them to stay out because they've either been exposed to someone and they're doing the right thing by notifying us that they've either been exposed or they know someone has or they're having symptoms, what we're finding out is staffing is becoming an issue. So I knew at that point that there was no way I can guarantee we had enough staff to open the building, and I'm not 100% certain we've gotten a hold of everyone, so I had to make the decision at that point to close Barnard School on Friday. I know it was disappointing for a lot of kids, especially since their Thursday, Friday cohort was only in for one day, and all of a sudden they got another day ripped from them. So I just felt I owed an explanation to I'm sure the kids aren't watching, but at least their parents, if they are, as to what went into this decision. I meant what I said. The health and safety of our staff and our kids is what's guiding us all through this. I can take the criticism for a decision like this if it's erring on the side of caution. But as I said that, and we thought we were out of the woods with everything, with the 2 cases that we had, came Sunday morning at about 9 o'clock that I got another phone call that indeed we had yet a second case at Enfield High School. And although the cases were separate, there was some commingling of people we had to contact because of the days of when people were there in the cohorts. So although it was a separate case, there were some common people that were involved. I'm telling you all this because the contact tracing at Enfield High School, although it was one building, took us almost 6 days. And it didn't take 6 days because staff is lazy. And I can confirm that because I know our staff at Enfield High School spent the entire day Sunday working on contact tracing. I can't tell, it didn't take 6 days because they didn't take it serious. Some people, you know, when they first notified us, they were in the middle of doing something with their family and they dropped it. They took it very serious. The reality is there are things that we don't control, and none of us could have factored in as we were planning. As well as we're planning, the good news is the plans worked. We were able to meet the protocols that we had promised the community we would, but the things that we couldn't factor in were things like time. And there's things that we don't control. We can't control that someone we need to get in contact with is going to answer their phone on a Sunday, on a remote Wednesday after 4 o'clock, or at any time. We don't control that. but we can't just leave a voice message. We have to make sure we make contact with that person. We can't control that people are going to be completely forthright with us. And that's not knocking anyone. But again, when you get that phone call, I can assure you, people aren't thinking straight. And people forget to tell us certain things, or they come back, or sometimes people don't want to tell us certain things. So those are the types of obstacles that we're facing when we're going through this process. I mentioned earlier about staffing. The reason that I initially closed Henry Barnard School on Friday was I wasn't confident we'd have enough staff to run the building in person on Friday. And to put that in perspective, you all know that we use Kelly subs for our substitute teaching. You don't take my word for it. You can read the Hartford Courant last week on the front page. There was a big story about the lack of substitutes in the state of Connecticut. On average, we get about 60 substitutes a week from Kelly. And those of you on the Finance Committee know, because you ask every year, why are we paying so much in subs? Just to put in perspective, last week alone, and this is no fault of Kelly or anyone else, of the average that we get for 60, last week alone, we got 3. And we were lucky to get the 3 that we have. I don't know of any subs that we have gotten this week. I mentioned the staffing issue, and I mentioned it to the board, and I'm okay saying this publicly. One of the concerns that I had with Henry Barnard was that I didn't have a guarantee that I'd be able to open that school with a nurse. And at no point in time am I ever comfortable opening any school under any condition, particularly during a pandemic, without a school nurse. And if I didn't have an absolute assurance that I would have a nurse in that building, there was no way I was opening that place. And I understand the frustration that some may have, and I understand the short notice, especially for those working parents who are anticipating their child being in school on Friday and all of a sudden had to make the decision, or heard the decision and had to make adjustments. I empathize with you. I get it. I had young kids of my own. That's why I prefer to send the message out the night before and not call you at 5:30 in the morning. But I just want to ensure that we're doing everything we can for the right reasons, and that's to try to keep everyone as safe as we can. The one thing what have we learned since we've done this? One of the reasons why the initial recommendation that I made to you guys back in August was to stay in the hybrid model for a little longer than maybe some of our counterparts were for this very reason. I can't sit here tonight and tell any of you that I didn't expect this to happen. I can tell you that I was hopeful, as we all were, but given our size and given the nature of what we're dealing with, we all expected that we would be in this predicament at some point. We needed the extra time because we needed to see how we were going to handle it. I'm extremely proud of our staff. I can't thank not just our administrators who had to actually go through the contact tracing, but at both of those schools, our staff members, our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our clerical staff members, our cafeteria workers, our library aides, they all had an opportunity to panic and say, you know what, I'm heading for the hills. I didn't sign up for this. They didn't. They took the information calmly. They digested it. They trusted that we were going to do everything we can to not just protect them, but more importantly, to protect our students the best we can. And without them, none of this works. And our staff members, and I mentioned we're having staffing issues, it's not due to anybody's fault. It's because we're asking staff members to not come in. How many people do you know in your lives that had sniffles last week because it was 40 degrees out? And most of us, if you did anything, you were outside. And as my wife and I were standing outside realizing our nose are running, we're one of those people I would tell to stay home. Now I know why. It was 40 degrees and I was outside. Luckily I was on Saturday and it went away on Sunday, so I was able to come to work. But this is the world that we live in right now. And I'm not happy about it, and I know none of you are happy about it. But we're going to be dealing with this until we're not. And I think I owe it to all of you, and I owe it to all of you who are watching, whether you're in person or watching online or watching on television, to be honest and truthful with you. I also have to share that one of my concerns moving forward, and I know that at some point, my commitment to the community was that we would reassess the phase that we're in now this week and make a recommendation moving forward. One of the things that we have learned, and I actually learned this morning, or confirmed this morning on a call with DPH that I wasn't on, I'll admit, but I was on another call at noontime with the Hartford area superintendents, and it was confirmed more than once that as more districts are looking to go back full-time, the Department of Public Health put us all on notice to expect, more people to be in quarantine, because you have more people coming in, and that the contact tracing protocols are going to take longer than you anticipate. Normally, I may not believe that, but having experienced it over the past 72 hours or so, I know that to be true. So I have to ask for everyone's patience. Our goal is not to, one of the things I tried to avoid through this whole process was the starting and the stopping. I think that's as detrimental as to our kids as being out, but it's unavoidable. If we have a confirmed case in our schools, we have no choice but to follow the protocols. And until we can assure that everyone who cannot be in that building is not going to be there, we have to keep all of our options on the table. I say all this humbly because although we've had 3 confirmed cases, these are not going to be the last. And I don't want to be pessimistic about anything, but I want to be honest. We have a lot of people right now who we've either have done the right thing, and I want to commend all our parents out there who have been extra cautious, where if their child is showing any symptoms, they call us and say, you know, my child had a low-grade fever. It could be allergies, but I'm going to keep him or her home today. I can't thank you enough for that. I wish everyone would do it. But the reality is we have a lot of cases out there that, I shouldn't use cases, not the right word, a lot of scenarios out there as we speak where we're waiting for results. And that doesn't mean we're going to get, you know, a bunch of new positive cases in, but it doesn't mean we're not going to get any. And I don't think it's fair to everyone in the public to say we've had our 3 and we're done. That's just not the world that we're living in. And you don't have to take my word for it. I'm sure all of you get news alerts on your phones, or you get things on your email accounts where another school's closed or another school's down. It's happening, and we're all trying to deal with it the best we can. But what I refuse to do is lose sight on what's most important, and that's trying everything we can to make sure that we keep our people safe. That said, one of the things, and I've heard there are other towns that are going back, and I've talked to other superintendents, but you also have to recognize that we're a little bit different than other communities. You know, you look at some of our neighboring communities and you look at their largest school and you see how many students they have in their full population in just say their high school, and you realize that's about the size of Henry Barnard in our case. We have some places that we have more kids in Enfield High School in our cohort or in our half of our population than some high schools do if every kid were to come back. So every situation is different. And one of the frustrating things for me was at times at the state level sort of painting school reopening with a broad brush because every circumstance is different. One of the things that we're not keeping our eye off of is what's most important. And what's most important is we can't control the circumstances that we're faced with on a daily basis. If I get a call that there's a case, we're going to deal with it, and we're going to deal with it with everyone's safety in mind. But what's the end game for us? The end game is for us, our kids to get in, and we keep them in, and that we turn a corner on this. I don't have a lot of faith in 2020 anymore for a lot of reasons, but I'm starting to have more in 2021. So it's my hope that by the time we get past all of this, and whatever the circumstances may be, that we get our kids back in and we don't have to keep pulling them out and pushing them back in. That was what I was trying to avoid from the get-go. And just unfortunately, we haven't been able to do it. One of the other things I just wanted to mention, as we start having these conversations about what it is that we're to do next, I know that this week is sort of the cutoff for when I wanted to let families know. And there's a lot of information we've had that we've gotten through our experience. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of information we just don't know. And that's the reality. You know, you look today, the cases in Connecticut went up again today. Last week they were down. You're looking at numbers in New York City, because that was sort of the driver of what happened in March. New York City was over 3%. Now I'm hoping it was just a blip and we stay the way we are. But the reality is nobody really knows. And that's the frustrating part for all of us. I wish there was an end date on all of this. I wish we can say by next Thursday this is over and we can get back to normal. But we're going to do the best we can to create this most sense of normalcy for our kids as possible. I understand there's a lot of differing viewpoints when it comes to reopening of schools. I don't want to say this may come across wrong, and I please apologize if it does. It's not that I don't value everyone's opinion, I do, but the opinion that matters the most right now is what's best for our kids. That's it. We can, and I will have a in respectful disagreement with anyone, and I'm sure I'm getting emailed as we speak from people who don't agree with what I just said right now, because it happens every week. That's fine, and I'm a big boy, I can take it. At the end of the day, I have to think about what's in the best interest of our kids moving forward. And what we've been going through isn't great, but I am taking some solace in that our kids at least got back. They've got a little bit of sense of normalcy. I'm not saying the hybrid plan is the end-all be-all. It's not. But considering the alternatives, I'm very proud of the way our staff has adjusted to working on a hybrid plan. There are a lot of kinks that we have to work out. I have multiple conversations with our teachers union leadership. We recognize that there are some things that we have to collaboratively fix on the hybrid plan. But looking at it at the end of the day, and we take a step back, we have to take some pride in the fact that we were able to get our kids back in some fashion and give them a little sense of normalcy again, with the hope that we can increase that as we go down the road. I'll leave you with this. One of the things that is going to be a big factor in my decision is the experience that we've had, and what that means going down the road. For anything I recommend to you guys is what the impact of what we already know could have that could have in the future. What that means are the time that I spent a lot of time talking about today when it comes to the contact tracing protocols, as well as the staffing concerns that we have. Because as it's already been evident in the experience that we've had, the more people that are in self-quarantine, the less people that are in our buildings, including adults. And that's a significant concern that I have going forward as well. So that said, Mr. Chairman, I think I covered everything that I was hoping to cover. I can elaborate more if you wish, but.
All right, with all that being said, before we break up for questions, I just have one, and we might as well see we're on TV for the first time. And I know October 2nd is right around the corner, but do you have any recommendations now, or do we want to wait till October 2nd on what to do with our plan to go full-time possibly on the 19th? But again, I know October 2nd was the deadline, but do you have any recommendation on what you want to do?
I can tell you where my recommendation is right now, and I'm comfortable saying that I don't believe my recommendation will change in 3 days. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, as much as I want to get kids back in some sort of sense of normalcy, some of the concerns that I have are this. It took us 5 days to contact trace Enfield High School with 40% of our kids in it. If I put our entire student population back at the high school, and I'm going to lump JFK in that because of the circumstances of being under construction, I have to reasonably think we're doubling our student population, and the contact tracing time is going to take double. That's 12 days. In reality, if we get a case at Enfield High School and all our kids are there, I'm probably canceling school for 2 weeks, 14 days. Same goes for our elementary schools. And there's a couple of concerns for that as well. Right now, as you know, all of our kids are eating in the classrooms. And our desks are 6 feet apart. And when they're eating, they're taking their masks off. When you double up the amount of kids that are in that classroom, they're not 6 feet apart any longer. And what we've noticed is that 6 feet is important. I cannot sit here and look you guys in the eye and tell you I can keep every kid 6 feet apart if we put them all back in school. I can't. I'm not required to by state guidelines. I understand that, but I can't. It's not feasible. I can keep them 3 feet apart with masks, and we can do everything we can to help them with personal hygiene and to try to keep people separated. But when the weather starts to turn and those kids are sitting in classrooms and we can't utilize tents anymore, they are going to be 3 feet apart. And if there is an outbreak, retract that word. If there is a positive case, you now have, at a minimal, doubled the amount of people, because you think about this, and we're being pretty conservative right now. If there is a case, if you look at a seating chart in a classroom, if there is a person that's sitting in this particular seat, and although the other seats are 6 feet apart, we're still notifying those who may have been within that 6 feet. Even though the desk is six feet apart, we can't guarantee that it wasn't 5'9", 5'8". So we're being conservative to make sure we notify anyone who might have been in close contact. If you consolidate that down to 3, that's double the people. And that's double the people we have to find. And not just at the high school, but even at the elementary schools. That means that we've got to our protocols are probably going to take double what they did. One of the benefits of the hybrid plans are Wednesdays. Now, although we needed 2 days at Enfield High School and then ultimately a third for another case, we only needed 1 day at Henry Barnard School, and that was because our kids were in cohorts. That's because there wasn't a lot of kids in those particular rooms. And one of the other factors was we have the Wednesdays to our advantage. And what I mean by that, by having the Wednesday remote day, you actually gain 3 potential days that you otherwise would not have to cancel school for. Because if you have to close school on, say, Tuesday, you've got Wednesday, and if you have to close on Thursday and Friday, you then have the weekend to allow us the time to finish the contact tracing, to deal with any staffing issues that we may or may not have, and to also thoroughly clean the buildings as many times as possible. When you take that Wednesday away, you're canceling school days. And because of the volume and the size of our schools, I'm not confident that if we had a positive case and we were all, and this whole student population was back, that I wouldn't have to make a blanket statement. And it's not just me. I mean, I'm sure all of you guys see the Hartford Courant's running total of schools that are closed. One of the things that you probably noticed over the last few days is the districts that were closing for 1 or 2 days, you're seeing a lot more closed for 14 days, closed for 14 days. That's because more people are coming back and the process is taking that much longer. And it's not because we want to keep kids out for 14 days. It's because we need to guarantee our responsibility is to make sure we are in contact of every single person who may be a close contact. And without that assurance, we can't open the doors. The other thing that's a reality, and this is more geared toward the high school, and this is heartbreaking to even think, but they're due back on October 19th. If we open the high school full-time, and there's a case at Enfield High School on October 20th, the school's closed for 14 days. All of our student athletes, and I know this is not about sports, but I feel horrible for all of our student athletes over the past several months because they've been yo-yoed back and forth with, can they play, can they not play, can they work out, can they stretch, can they do this, can they do that? And even with football, we are going to be moving into some sort of 7-on-7 football program. It's not full contact, but it's all within the guidelines of DPH. They finally have an answer. They're going to start games next week. If I have to close school for 14 days at Enfield High School, sports are done then. Because of the length of the season is over. And I don't have the heart to do it to those kids, to be honest with you. I mean, if October 20th, I got to close Enfield High School for 14 days, I also have to tell our entire athletic department they're done for the fall. And whether or not they've had their senior nights, whether or not they've had an opportunity, because they only get 2 spectators per game, so maybe they're alternating with family members, and maybe their next game was the one that mom or dad was finally able to come to, that game's not happening. And I know we did that in the spring with some of our spring sports where we had to make an abrupt close, and I wasn't happy about that, but we don't control it. We do have a say in this. Those kids can absorb a day or 2 closing. It's no different than a sport that has to play during a winter season where we have to close for snow. And we're hopeful that as we continue this process, if we stay in the phase that we're in, that we'll get better as we go and hopefully be quicker as we go. Because of that, I wouldn't have to make that decision to say we can no longer compete in athletics because we're only going to be out potentially a day or 2 days. If it's 14 days and because of the timing, the season ends in November, it would be the end of it. And I don't think that's fair to do to our kids. And I'm not saying this decision is made solely based on athletics. It's one of the contributing factors to it that you have to take into consideration. However, the most important factor in this is of the options we have, what's worse for our kids? And that's the struggle that I have every day. And I can assure you that the gentleman on the end who finally got a live mic is sick of hearing me say this, going to his office saying, it's the lesser of 2 evils. And I say it this way. What's worse for our children? Knowing that, yes, they're only going to be in school part-time, and there is still a possibility their school may close, albeit for a day or 2 like we've experienced. But there's the potential for them to return next week and the week after. Or knowing that in the event their school has to close, they're out for 14 days. And I say this because I have to think of our most vulnerable kids. It doesn't matter what school they're in, what program they're in. If there's a case and we have to close for 14 days, that whole school is closed, including our special needs students. And I don't know how we would conduct those services for that length of a period of time fully remotely. You have to remember, through this process in the hybrid, we're allowing those students to attend 4 days if they choose. And we've had success doing that. Again, it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it's a heck of a lot better than where we were last spring. And that's a serious decision we'd have to make. If I have to close Eagle Academy for 14 days, those kids are going all remote for 14 days. That doesn't do anybody any good. So because of that, my recommendation at this point would be to stay with the program that we're currently in the hybrid plan. And my recommendation would be, I know we've had a lot of discussion about the length of time to do this, and I'm hesitant to use the term indefinitely. So as we played around with dates, one of the dates that stuck out to me was November 9th. And the reason for November 9th was, on November 11th is Veterans Day. So we're already closed on that day. So in the event we are able to return, and there's a lot of what ifs on that, that's assuming that the health data stays where it is, and that's assuming that we don't get an influx of additional cases. In the event that we are able to return then, and students were to come back, there would be 2 days with a natural break on Wednesday for kids, where it will give us an opportunity to clean the buildings again, and like we traditionally do on Wednesdays, and then another 2 days to return after that, and hopefully ease kids back into the notion of being in school every day. Again, that also gives us additional time. Just today, I didn't expect to hear what I heard at the state level, that we're now getting closer to 2% as opposed to under 1%. All the health experts are telling us if we're going to see it, it's probably going to start in October. I'm not a health expert. I'm not an epidemiologist. They all told us it was going to come back over the summer. It did in some places. I don't know. None of us know. But what we do know is they've been warning us that as the weather turns, that's when we should anticipate whether or not we're in a better place to start putting kids back in full time. I realize there are districts that are doing it. Unfortunately for us, and I didn't factor this in when I made my original recommendation, is the districts that are going back full time, they're doing it this week. I don't know how it's working. I talked to one superintendent today, who will remain nameless, who told me if I make it to the end of the week, I'll be shocked. So I don't have any data for the districts that are doing it full time, but I do have intuition with some of those superintendents that are saying, we don't think it's going to work, but we're giving it a try. So I understand, I kind of making that self-proclaimed date of this week of notifying families, I'm kind of boxed into, we have to make a decision this week. Now, my options are I can wait to the end of the week and see if something changes. But as I said earlier, and again, I'm going to be brutally honest, we have a number of potential things floating out there right now. I would not be surprised if I got a call tomorrow that we have another case. And I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just being truthful. So I don't see any information in the next 3 days changing my comfort level to say, you know what, it's better than I thought. Let's go back 5 days. So that's where I am. I understand people aren't going to agree with that. I get that. I also will share that I have had conversations with our teachers union leadership, where we've had some pretty brutally honest conversations about how things are going and where we see things going. And as I said earlier, the hybrid plan there are kinks like we expected, but we've committed to collaboratively working through them. But at the same time, we also understand that in the event we were to try to pack all our kids back in the next couple of weeks, none of us think how it's feasible at this point in time. And that's just the sad reality of it. So that would be my recommendation, is to continue with the hybrid plan until now. Again, if you want to choose a different date, I'm okay with it. My rationale was getting us past that November 1st deadline, because that's what we keep hearing. What I was shared with at the state over the summer was, if you get to November 1, we'd be surprised. I don't know if I'm allowed, I don't know if I was supposed to say that out loud on television, but I just did. So this whole thing started with, if you get to November 1, we'll be shocked. So I wasn't going to pick November 1 because we have to tell people prior to that. So November 9th doesn't take up the entire month of November. It just worked out with Veterans Day being on a Wednesday. That would be a good transition for kids to get back in, and for staff to get back in, and for our B&G staff to get in and give us that extra cleaning day just for peace of mind, if nothing else. So that's where I'm certainly open to discussion on that. But and I've had conversations about recommending going longer, taking this through Thanksgiving, taking it for the whole year, taking it for the whole calendar year. Right now, I'm comfortable with that date, but I'm certainly open to it. And I certainly recognize that there's going to be a difference of opinion on this throughout the community. I understand that. But the reason I spent so much time just now during the first Yankee playoff game that I've been waiting since March for, because I thought it was important for everyone to know the real obstacles and hurdles that we're dealing with trying to track all this stuff down. At the end of the day, I have to be able to look myself in the mirror at night. And again, it's not a good decision, but what's the best decision of the bad options, and what's the least impactful for kids? In my opinion, having kids be out for 2 weeks because we have to close their whole school down is worse than having them in a hybrid fashion and potentially closing them down. I don't want to say we're never going to close because I can't guarantee that, but knowing that that's in some cases we can control the amount of time that kids may have to be out based strictly on density and volume. So that's where I would be. I appreciate you asking. I was hesitant to say anything now because I did say the end of the week, but I agree with your sentiment, Mr. Chairman. People want to know. And I don't see my opinion changing between now and Friday, so why drag this out any longer than we have to? I think you're also never going to get a larger audience than you have right now, probably. So the options are I could have sent out a robocall on Friday and told everybody that, or just put it on television. So that's what I would recommend at this point.
Any other questions, Mr. Ryder?
Yes, real quick. I just wanted to clarify, so when you say close the buildings, again, we're doing remote learning those days. School is not closed. The buildings are closing.
Yes, I'm sorry, closed for in-person learning.
Yep. And then I did notice that when the high school had to close Thursday, Friday, and Monday, and Henry Barnard on Friday, what we did with the students' instruction was we followed the Wednesday schedule. So is that like a snow day schedule? Or if this does happen for 2 weeks straight, would a Monday be a Monday and a Tuesday be a Tuesday?
Right now, the way it's designed is we implemented the Wednesday remote schedule because it was designed for that purpose of being remote. If we were to try to go on a regular schedule and a rotation schedule, we weren't prepared for that because we still had the in-person days. So that's why I'm making very clear that we are following the Wednesday remote day for this time. Now, in the event we are forced to go fully remote, we reserve the right to change that. But right now, what's least confusing for all involved is staying on that Wednesday remote schedule. So any day that a school is closed, and I'm glad you mentioned the S word, because I don't anticipate ever having them again. And I know that the State Board of Ed hasn't ruled on that yet, but quite frankly, I don't care. And I think it'll make everyone's life a lot easier to tell them the day before, because although the state hasn't approved snow days yet, they have approved remote days. So if you get a robocall on the night before a snowstorm that says the Enfield Public Schools is moving to a remote day, that means it's a snow day. But yes, to answer your question, right now we found, and it was requested by the schools and by the teaching staff too, to follow the Wednesday remote day for any unanticipated school in-person closures.
Good. So that's something we can just help clarify as we're talking to people out at the grocery store, et cetera, just because they were just wondering why it was the Thursday when the high school was closed, but they're doing the Wednesday schedule. So that's good to know that for now, if you are home because the building is closed, please follow the Wednesday remote schedules.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Okay, so thank you for clarifying that. I know that there's been some concern at the high school with the Wednesday schedule because of the students that take classes at Asnuntuck and the Greater Hartford Arts Academy. So are there some solutions?
The Greater Hartford Academy of Arts has already been resolved, and I know they're working on the Asnuntuck piece right now.
Okay, perfect. And then, so now we're saying that if the students opted, or the parents opted for the students to go full remote, they had until October 16th, and then they could change. So would that now mean they'd have to wait until October 9th to opt back in?
No, what I would recommend, if anybody wanted to opt back in, that we would stick to that original date.
Okay.
Of October 16th. I think
Okay.
that's only fair. But again, that also would give families an opportunity to stay with whatever they're comfortable with for essentially an additional 3 weeks. Is
Right.
why I didn't want to extend it much longer.
Right.
But we would allow anyone that wanted to opt back into in-person learning to return on October 19th if they chose.
Rather than the 9th?
Yes.
Okay, and then my next question is, so you're recommending that we would stay in the hybrid till November 9th, and then we would talk about in-person? And this might not even be discussed, and this might not be even your recommendation just yet, but I guess I'm wondering if we would continue to offer the strict remote option.
Yes, the strict remote option, my understanding, and I haven't heard anything from the contrary, is going to be available to families for the entire academic year. I don't see the state loosening that restriction. Although we don't have anything definitive for the entire year, but it's my understanding that if a family chooses to go fully remote, that they will be afforded that opportunity for the remainder of this academic year.
Okay.
And I wouldn't hold anyone, accountable for anything otherwise.
Right. And then I guess my last question would be, and this question arose, if you're living in the household with somebody who has symptoms and a case is pending, then you should not attend school?
Correct. And I have to implore anyone who's listening, if you or anyone in your household has been tested and you're awaiting the results, please do not come to school. Please do not send your child to school, because in the event that you do and the test were to come back positive, that is a direct contact. And then we have to start the contact tracing protocols. I've heard from people who have asked the same question. My child doesn't have any symptoms. I got him tested as a precaution, but he or she will be fine. They're fine, and we're keeping them away from the infected person. The reality is, you don't know until you get clearance on that. Now, there's a difference. If we sent you home, it's 14 days regardless, even if you do produce a negative test. But if you're notifying us that you've taken yourself or your child or a family member to get tested, there's a reason for that. Please don't come until you get the results. And I'll be honest, we're seeing a lot of that. And we're getting lucky in some cases. But there's going to be cases where we're not.
And then since the positive cases we have we seen any transitions as a result of that going to full remote?
Oh, you mean current?
Since we've had.
Yes, since we.
Yeah, it seems like I know that what's out in the community is that it's very scary to hear that. So some parents have said, you know what, I need my child to go from hybrid to fully remote.
Yeah. And again, that's another delicate balance.
Yeah.
Enfield High School, we've gotten 41 families who have opted out since we first closed last Wednesday.
Okay.
Now, I know there could be an argument to say, well, there's less kids that are coming, and then we got more room to put more kids in.
Right.
My fear is that those parents are opting their children out because of one positive case. What I'm trying to avoid is more people having a reason to not send their kids. So if we use that as, well, there's less kids coming, we have more spots, we can put more kids in, what we're seeing in the evidence is that it's actually contrary to that. And we're seeing students, since we canceled the first time at Wednesday at Enfield High, JFK parents have removed their children and opted for remote learning. My fear is that the thought of bringing more kids in is going to make more parents second guess. And I guess I'll just put it plainly. I've heard from a number of parents who were hesitant about sending their kids, chose to send them because we were in a hybrid, were comfortable with the idea of them being there 2 days a week, being only with the same kids alphabetically, and are happy with the process thus far. But have also said, if you go back, I'm pulling my kid. So my fear is you're kind of biting off your nose to spite your face, that if you have more spaces, you send more, it may result in more kids staying home, which is ultimately what we don't want to do. We ultimately want as many kids to come as can. I understand people who choose not to, but ultimately we want to make it as inviting as possible for parents to say, and what we have seen to be, and this is not a testament to us too, this is a testament to everybody in the buildings. What I've heard from parents is, I was scared to send my kid in. But the first day they got back there, their teacher made them feel right at home. Even though they couldn't see his or her face, they couldn't hug them or They shouldn't have hugged them. Maybe they did. But it was them, and that was the faith we had all along of, is this going to work? Is this going to work? And the argument was, as soon as they see them, they'll be fine. And that was true. And that's a testament to our staff members, everybody in the building, from the first person you see in the main office to your teacher, to your para, to your CAF worker, to everybody in that building. That has really, the reason that this has been successful is because of that. And I want to encourage more people to come, not discourage them.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Anyone else questions? Mr. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, it's not so much a question, but maybe a comment. Sorry. Maybe a comment based on the statements that you made, even though obviously the focus is not athletics at any level. But you mentioned, the possibility if we have some more cases or if it's a more serious event that occurs, that the closing for a longer period of time. Maybe a consideration would be for those senior days and those sports that are taking place to be moved forward, to take place earlier than towards the end of the season.
They're doing that now. I actually talked to Corey today. They're trying to front load the senior days as early as possible. In the event that circumstances were to change, we don't want to rob those kids of that opportunity.
Correct.
So that's a good idea. Actually, I can't take credit for that. Corey was already on top of it with the coaches. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. LeBlanc was first.
Mr. Drezik, I respect your recommendation and everything you told the community tonight. With that being said, and your recommendation now being put out there, one question I have was any plan looked into to possibly not go back full time yet, but progress in some sort of capacity, maybe K through 2 is full time, maybe you more I don't know, just some kind of progression that what we're currently doing with our hybrid model, but not full time to that extent, but somewhere in between.
Yes, there was a lot of consideration for that, and particularly for our youngest learners. One of the things that we're looking at was, as you said, K-2, possibly getting those kids back in more full-time. The challenge and the hurdle that we can't get over, to be quite frank, is how are we going to feed them? Because right now our students are eating in their classrooms, and they are sitting 6 feet apart because they're in a hybrid model. And when they're sitting 6 feet apart, they're allowed to take their masks off and eat their lunch. If we were to put all of our student body back together, so let's say you take a class of 9 to a class of 18, we can no longer guarantee that 6 foot space for those kids to eat, which means we would have to then explore putting them in an alternate place to keep that spacing on. What we've learned through this process is that the 6 feet is actually, although, and again, it contradicts themselves, the guidelines contradict that a bit where it says 3 feet is only required. So all of us, went through this process, and I know Ms. Costa, you get a mask on, but I could probably read your lips. Like, we did the whole thing with 3 feet because that's what they told us to do. But now that we have positive cases, we're finding out the importance of the 6 feet, particularly when our little guys are eating lunch or eating snacks and not being able to take their mask off because they're not 6 feet away from their classmates. So that's going to be a significant challenge. Unfortunately, the schedule and the calendar work against us because when we're able to get them in, coincides as the weather gets worse. And that option of having kids eat outside becomes more and more diminished. So that's one of the things that we're actively working on, because when we do get them, if everything stays the same, and what's really hamstringing us are these guidelines, to put it out there. I mean, the guidelines haven't changed. Nothing's changed. The public health metrics haven't changed. What's changing is we're experiencing positive cases and the fallout of that. And having that understanding that if there is a student or staff member, there's a positive case, we can't have kids, because that entire class, just to put in perspective, if a kid was eating and there were 18 kids plus 2 adults in a kindergarten class, it's 20 people. If there was a positive case in that class, that whole class is gone. 14 days they're out. And in some cases, we would then have to figure out where else were they? Were they in the bathroom? Although maybe they shouldn't have been, maybe they were. The other thing, and I apologize, I failed to mention this earlier, and I have to commend our staff, or not our staff, but our partners over at Smith Bus. But one of the things that is impossible to track, and I shared with this over the summer, we had every intention on hiring bus monitors. I told you we have 3 substitutes. They're harder to find bus monitors than substitutes. the guidelines let you run your buses to near capacity. So we can put in restrictions on where kids are going to sit, where they're going, and how they're going to act on the bus. But the reality is, you can't socially distance on a bus outside of, the first 3 rows and last 3 rows. Everybody else is within 6 feet. And although, if you got a little kid sitting behind a seat and the bus driver's trying to monitor if they have their mask on, you can't stop a kindergartner from pulling their mask down. And if their mask was down and they're within 6 feet and there was a positive case with somebody identified on that bus, the contact tracing for that would be remarkable, because we'd have to not only go for every kid that was on that bus, where they were in their schools, siblings. That's the challenge that we're facing. And I understand, we did look at, as you suggested, trying to phase different levels of kids in, but the additional hurdles we're seeing between eating, buses, and contact tracing, they're just there.
2 more questions. Next one would be, you mentioned that when you make these contact tracing calls, you don't leave a voicemail, or the option, you don't leave a voicemail, I guess is essentially what you said. My question would be, is that something to consider? Therefore, like, for instance, I may see a number come up, but I don't answer it because it's not my contacts, or issues like that, or they listen to a voicemail, they gather themselves for 15 minutes, and then they're willing to call you back and have a conversation about it.
And I thanks for bringing that up. I probably should have clarified. We can't solely leave a voicemail. So we can leave a voicemail. This is Chris Drezicki, please call me back about something. If we don't hear from them, we have to call. We have to make contact. So either they return our call or we keep calling until we get them. But we will leave a, yes, we will. When I say we can't leave a voicemail, we can't just leave a voicemail. We have to make contact with that person.
And last,
Have been, and to the credit of the 2 staff members that I told, believe me, I get updates like every 10 minutes, like 3 of the voicemails called back, or I've got to call another person back. It's constant.
okay. Last question. With this recommendation, does that mean a new survey will still be going out, or?
Yes, I think, as Ms. LeBlanc stated, I think it's time to reset for everybody in the community. Now, we've been doing internal surveys at schools, more so on how the hybrid is working and getting information from parents and from students about the challenges that they're having. This is the first time we're here, and it's been hard to present things, so I'm hopeful at some point we can present something to you guys. But I would anticipate sending out another parent survey to find out what their intentions would be, either continuing with this model, or would they obviously choose to go fully remote. But I also want to make it very clear to family members that maybe have opted out at this point, that they do have the opportunity to opt back in again if they choose. I don't think it was fair to just say, well, because we're extending you too. That wasn't their choice. Their choice was till October 16th. So we would conduct that survey again. Again, this is the first time I'm actually saying this out loud as far as a recommendation. I mean, outside of between Andy and I, because I was preparing to, come up with a recommendation by the end of the week, like I had said that I would. So there's a lot of faculty members and staff members and probably principals watching this right now going, why didn't you tell us this? It's because the conversation led the way that it did.
And just so the staff knows, I asked the question, so. So don't blame
actually,
the superintendent.
No, I appreciate it, Mr. Gruzel, because one of the things that we've been wrestling with internally was what's going to change our mind. And believe me, we've been looking. I mean, we're looking for every avenue to try to make this work. But every time we do, there's another obstacle. And again, Mr. Salazar is correct. The decision is not based on sports. But that was just another thing added to the plate of, there's going to be another group of disappointed kids if this were to happen, and can we do something to avoid it? It's not perfect, it's not ideal, but that's one of the pros and cons of, I don't take this recommendation lightly at all. I didn't the first time I made it. If I knew that this was what I would be doing with my life, I probably wouldn't have said yes 3.5 years ago. But I'm here, I love it, so here's where we are.
Mr. Ungary had a question.
I do. Mr. Superintendent, do we follow up on the persons who tested positive to see how they're doing, their overall condition, and any way to gauge the severity of of that?
Yes, so once we make the notification, we also have to notify, so we actually conduct the initial, and I keep Patrice going to get mad at me for saying this. I use the term contact tracing because that's what we're all familiar with. What we're actually doing is notifying close contacts. And we have to keep a database of every person that we have identified as a close contact. We have to take their information, who they are, and their contact information, and we have to share that with the North Central Health District. At that point, they have official contact tracers through the health department that they are then in contact with. Now, the health department is also made aware of any positive case. So it's really just a race against who's going to get it first. We're hopeful that we do because that means parents are following the protocol and telling us. But there are some times where we'll get a call from the health department that says, you have a positive case in Enfield. But yes, the follow through would either be, it's probably most likely a combination of both. I know the school is reaching out to families of the infected person to see how they're doing. And I know the health district also does that as well. So there is follow through. I can't share that because that's private information, but we do have a vested interest to see how these three individuals are doing.
Ms. Costa.
Thank you. As I said, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago when we sat here the last time to talk about this topic, I'm very supportive of your recommendation to remain in a hybrid fashion for the next till November 9th. But I'm going to continue to advocate for some criteria that will drive a decision to either go full-time or even to go fully remote. And I think there's always going to be a subjective component to this, and we're always going to be learning something new. But there is a lot of science and metrics available currently, and I just think that parents and students should have an understanding of what we're thinking in terms of what those metrics are going to be to enable either a full-time learning environment or not. If the contact tracing is so onerous, and therefore we probably wouldn't go back full-time until we had no new cases for 2 weeks or whatever, realistically, we are probably months away from that risk going away. Because until there's a vaccine and everybody takes it, that risk is probably pretty great. I remain concerned about the loss of academics in a hybrid environment, but more so the mental health of the children. And parents have options, and I just think that if they had something more concrete that they were basing their decision on, they could probably make a better decision for their children. So that's all. Thank you.
If I may, Ms. Costa, you raise a good point, and and again, this isn't a decision, and I don't disagree. Unfortunately, I don't have that definitive answer because the goalpost keeps getting moved. When I first made this recommendation back in August, contact tracing and staffing issues and the things that we're experiencing and living weren't reality at that point. But we knew there was going to be obstacles. One of the things that did, and I want to make sure that I say this publicly, right now, I'm basing my recommendation on the criteria of what's worse for kids. And whether that's not a scientific metric, I know that's subjective, but I'm asked to make a decision on what's more impactful for kids. Having the ability to still have that FaceTime in their schools, even in the event there is a case, we can control the time that they're out, or by running the risk of putting them all in at the same time and knowing full well that we're probably going to have to shut down for an extended period of time. And you said something interesting that made me recollect one of the conversations that Andy and I had over the last couple of days. In the event we were to go with the latter and school was closed for 2 straight weeks, and although we would still be, as Mr. Ryder said, we would be remote learning for those 2 weeks, school wouldn't be canceled, the availability of social and emotional support and mental health support for those kids in a remote environment is less than when we have them in an in-person environment. And in fact, we may be eliminating that potential for those kids to get the services that they need because we are eliminating that block of time where we are keeping them out. And again, it's not a perfect science, but we know from the spring the emotional toll that this has taken on all of our kids. So I'm really looking at this as how do we guarantee more in-person time? This isn't a question for me about being in school full time. It's more about the density of everybody being there at the same time. That's the challenge that I'm having. If we can do this in the hybrid format every day, that would be the best case scenario. But we only have 5 days a week. If we had 10, it would be great. I'm really more concerned with the amount of kids being together and our inability to keep them properly separated as we've experienced, more so than I am to say, you know, the transmission rate's too high, I'm never going to come back to school. So that's more of what my thinking is that I want to make sure that we still have that in-person contact in some capacity with kids because they need it. And what risk is greater? By bringing them all back, the likelihood is, and this isn't just for me, I mean, this is from DPH, you're going to probably quarantine more and you're going to be closing more, or stay the way you are, but at least guarantee the time or have a better control of the amount of time that they're actually in.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And that being said, I think that leads to the conclusion that, because I think way beyond November 9th, if that's what we're going to decide whether or not we go back to school based on the odds of keeping children in school longer than having to quarantine for 14 days if we send them all back, that sounds to me like a criteria that says as long as there's the likelihood that there's going to be new cases, which is probably months in the future, then that this is probably more than a November 9th decision to remain hybrid.
And again, and I'm not trying to actually agree with you on a lot. One of the things that we don't know is what the position of the state on the guidance is going to be going forward. If the transmission rate remains where it is, there may be more flexibility in what they're guiding us to do that may change the format and change the way that we have to design our programming. So those are all things that we're taking into consideration as we look. I agree. It could seem on the surface that until there's a cure, we're not going back full time. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I'm just looking at the data that we have now, the experience that we have now, and our ability that it's a lot harder. It's harder to take something away from somebody that they already have than it is to give them something new. And our families have something now. And by changing it, it increases the likelihood that we'd be taking it away and for a longer period of time. And that's the part that I struggle with, because there can be everybody who's playing by the rules and doing the right thing, but their school might get shut down for 2 weeks, and those kids are going to be home suffering because somebody else didn't follow the rules. Hypothetically, that didn't happen. I'm just saying. So that's the perspective that I'm looking at this from, is I don't want to take things away. I want to deal with what we know now with the hopes of continuing this dialogue with those who are dictating what we do, of how are we going to, and the other piece of this is there are districts that are smaller than us that are going back. And I said it earlier, I had one superintendent told us today, I may be closed by the end of the week, but that's because of the rules. We may be pleasantly surprised on the districts that are in a better position to do it based on volume, and I am not embarrassed to learn from them or to borrow their ideas. That the problem is we don't have any data on that right now because they're all doing it as we speak. And, you know, one of the unfortunate things we did when we first did this, when I first said this in August was, you know, we'll tell everybody by the first week of October. Well, I didn't know the people who were going to go first were going to go first the first week of October. But they're in a position to do it because they're smaller. So I'm hoping to know more in the coming weeks. And there may be things that we learn from others that we can implement here to turn that around, and that may give us a better comfort level to say, yeah, we're going to move forward with this. But again, there is still a lot of unanswered questions, and there's really no playbook on how to do this. That's the frustrating part for all of us. So I understand your position. I wish it was as easy as, yep, we're doing it. But you have to take all the consequences of doing that before I have to basically make a recommendation to you guys.
Anyone else? Questions? Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Mr. Drezek, thank the staff personally for me, that all the calls they have to make on a Sunday, no less. And I've been coming into central office more often and seeing what they needed to do, and they literally have a spreadsheet that they literally go through and check off, okay, we called this one, we didn't, this one, we have to reach out to this one, and oh, no, then we got to go back and reach out to this one. So I witnessed some of it, so it's incredible that we are where we are, but this is the life we're in right now. So thank you again.
So if I could just to clarify for those maybe watching now that we've had this discussion that wasn't necessarily anticipated, everybody kind of knows. It doesn't require another vote. It didn't require a vote the first time, as you know, but I felt important that we did it. So this is a decision that we're going to move forward with at this point. I've heard some, not strong objections, but assuming that's the case, I'm going to start notifying people because I'm sure I've got 100 emails from people saying, what do you mean we're going out even longer? So there's no surprises. I will communicate that to the public at some point this week.
And I felt that this was something, because we're live and we're in chambers for the first time. I felt this was something that we could move ahead 3 days early and get a decision. So with that, we will continue with audiences. Reminder that we are 3 minutes and one time only. We are not doing the sign-up sheet. What we're going to do is you're going to come up, say your name and address for the record clearly, and then I will start the 3 minutes after you say that. So does anyone in the audience wish to speak in front of the board? I'll start with you first. Sorry, just the microphone's already on. Just come up to the table. Just the microphone. I can see the microphone's already on. Just come up to the table. Like I said, I'll start the 3 minutes after you clearly say your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Michelle Wilcox, and I live at 5 Sherrill Drive. I am a lifelong resident of Enfield, and I have had the privilege to teach in Enfield for my entire adult life. So I've taught for 29 years in town. I would like to just thank Mr. Drezek for being so respectful with regard to the students and staff of Enfield with our health and our well-being. I teach at Hazardville Memorial, which is a K-2 school, and I can tell you that students struggle with social distance at that level. It's very challenging for them. We work hard to explain social distance and to have them keep their masks on so that they can be safe. But I couldn't imagine working in a classroom with 22 students who are ages 4 to 7, having them 3 feet apart with all their masks on. That seems like a daunting task, and it seems like it would be an unsafe environment. Let's see. I'm also active in the union. I have to say the hybrid model is far from perfect, but I know the administration and the Enfield Teachers Union will work together to improve this model. The problems we have with the hybrid model can be worked out. They can be adjusted without endangering the health of our children and our staff. I have always been proud to say that I am an Enfield school teacher. Thank you, Mr. Drezek.
Thank you. Next. And again, name and address for the record, and then we'll start the...
Yeah, I could hear through the mask. Name's Elizabeth Davis. I reside at 201 North Maple Street. I would like to echo the same. Mr. Drezek, thank you very much. On behalf of my family and having a child in the school, grandkids and everything, it's a tough time, and thank you for leading the correct way during these tough times. I know you're taking heat for a lot of different reasons, but you're standing your ground and you're putting the kids and our staff safety first before anything. So I do truly appreciate that. Thank you. So why I'm here is I was watching the policy meetings, and since this is the first meeting to come in and excuse me since I just had surgery last week, so I'm still coming through it all. What I've taken from the August 10th policy and then your September 22nd policy is showing a lot of it is brought onto the trans policy to remove that. Now, when we watched the August 10th meeting, pretty much a lot of it is based on that. But also in that meeting states from our chair of the Board of Ed, if we have policies that are working, they're not broke, then don't mess with them, which I would totally agree with you on that one, on that statement. Move forward a little to September 22nd because the Board of Ed denied the read-in. So I would like to thank Ms. LeBlanc, Ms. Hall, Ms. Thurston, and Mr. Ryder for actually voting to send it to a read-in. So it went back. Then I'm watching the 22nd meeting, September 22nd, and watching how it comes up again, the trans bill. But now, because it came and was pushed back, we decide we're going to take any recommendations of any of the 5,000 series out, because people did get public about the trans and what was being done. So now we're going to remove 20-something of our policies in the student handbook that actually helps our students and our staff. Because of what? Because we have a problem with trans? I want to remind everybody, you're there to represent everybody, no matter what your walk of life is, no matter who they are. These students have a right. And blatantly, the way it looked in 2 meetings is you signaled it out, which is pretty wrong when you have inexperienced people even on it voting to do that. With that said, kind of shows a little bit of prejudice coming through. And I'm always going to be a voice for kids with trans or any student out there. And to remove it, you're wrong. There's laws, and as you stated, we can change it in 2 to 3 years, Mr. Cruzel, if the laws change. Why would we take a policy out, wait 2 or 3 years to put it back in because people are fighting and waiting for judgment? If it's truly about our students and every student, you'd leave the policy in there and not pull out 20-something other policies just so you could yank this out when quite a bit of them are good and we need them. Also, Mr. Dresnick, I want to close on a positive. Thank you with the sports very much too. Through the conditioning and watching the sports now, these coaches down there are above and beyond. 6 feet, they'll have them 10 feet. You know, they're amazing, they're doing it, the kids are following it, and the same with all our staff in the school. And what's remarkable here is our students and staff keeps a mask on the whole time they're in school. But here it looks like a party split. Republicans don't believe in a mask and Democrats do. You're in a closed building, so can our kids stay in school all day, 6 feet apart without a mask? No, only when they're eating. Let's practice what we preach, and let's lead by example. Our teachers got to keep that mask on for hours and hours also. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? Last call. Anyone else? State your name and address for the record, and then I'll start the time.
Kelly Hemler, 10 Harvard Ave. I just wanted to give you a comment. Yeah, Mr. Dresnick, doing a great job. I wouldn't want your job. And to all the Board of Ed, you're all volunteers. Never been through anything like this before. This is difficult, and I don't think all of you have gotten the credit that you should. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? I will close public communication. Thank you. I will proceed with board member comments, and we'll start with Mr. LeBlanc.
All right. First, and I thought I was on top of this. Maybe I missed something today. Although the last thing I saw, and it was before this meeting, I was reading that the CIAC came out with, they put out dates saying, basically looking at alternative dates for a spring football. I'm asking for clarification on, because you brought it up in the superintendent report, so.
You are correct. The CIAC did send out some potential recommendations to move the move the fall football season to the spring. And I apologize if I was shaking my head because one of the recommendations is that our football season would run before our spring sports. And I had a mask on, so you probably couldn't tell that I was giggling. One of the questions, the first day of outdoor practice for football would be February 7th. I don't know who's shoveling. I don't know if we have to buy hand warmers and making sure kids don't get, the concept of playing football in February is a little foreign to me, but because considering the Super Bowl is over by then, and those are usually warm weather states. But I think right now, to be completely honest with you, Mr. LeBlanc, I know this is a sensitive subject for a lot of people. I think the CIAC is just throwing things against the wall at this point. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. I agree with a lot that the agency does. But we knew this in July. The DPH wasn't going to change their position. These kids have had their hopes up. We finally came into an agreement that we had some sort of opportunity for these kids to play 7v7 football without contact. Linemen were able to do drills. We may be able to compete against other districts, although it's not ideal. We had all through CCC just finally came up with within the guidelines, within the recommendations of DPH, something for these kids to do and feel like they had a football season, even going as far as to let them wear their helmets. So they look like they feel like they're playing football. And then they throw this out today after everybody already sent their schedules in, and this is what we're going to do. There's 3 more options where you can play it in the winter. You can shovel the stuff. Honestly, we didn't get as far as to even read them all after I saw they're going to start February 7th, so I apologize for not being prepared for that answer, but I am as confused with the CIAC lately as I've ever been. I'm sorry if that doesn't answer your question.
Well, I guess I was just looking for clarification on what Enfield High's football team is doing. 7v7 was mentioned, and maybe I'm not as caught up as I thought I was for Enfield High in particular.
And I apologize. I assumed everyone was aware of that. So one of the things that we are able to do, and public health is okay with it, is that our essentially would be a 7 versus 7 non-contact competition. So it's essentially playing two-hand touch football. But there's no linemen because that would cause contact. There's no tackling. It would be one-hand touch as far as I was explaining, and the kids wear gloves. So, and the way I looked at it, to be completely honest, is when it was presented to me, I know initially I had said I'm not comfortable playing football if DPH isn't going to change their position. But when I looked at the presentation, and I credit the CCC coaches for coming up with it, and athletic directors, including our own, I didn't see any difference with that than soccer. The kids were still running around in each other's face. I actually think it's probably safer because in soccer, kids can butt their heads together as it happens. At least with football, kids with their helmets on, they're not going to be hitting their heads against each other. So I had approved that. And I also approved, for those who don't realize, for all athletic competitions, there is a lot of conversations about allowing spectators. Initially, CIAC recommended no spectators. DPH didn't really take a position on it. But based on the size of our teams, I thought it was only fair that, and to be honest, again, I know I keep saying the same thing. If I drive home, I can drive past a park in Ellington that there's 5,000 people there watching a youth soccer game or watching a Little League baseball game. But I'm going to tell high school athletes and possibly their last year that they can't have a parent come watch them play. So we're able to do, within our jurisdiction, allow each child to bring two guests, whomever they choose, to each home-only event. So we're only allowing home spectators. We're not having traveling spectators. Each participant gets 2 tickets, essentially, to bring a family member or a guest or whoever they choose to watch the event. We do have to eliminate evening events for the most part because that can cause people to congregate. And the events will be run by our security team to enforce. Now, for those of you who are watching who are intending on attending one of these contests, you will be required to wear a mask. You will be required to social distance at 6 feet if you want to attend the event. If not, security will escort you off. But it was the best compromise we can make to give these kids some real experience. So that's where we left football, Mr. LeBlanc. I'm sorry, it's a long answer. But that was to try to give these kids, after everything they've been through with football this year, from rallies to, you can't play, you can't practice. These kids have been through the ringer, no fault of their own. And in my opinion, because CIAC didn't make a decision when they should have. But as everyone is settling in and starting to schedule these contests for these 7 versus 7 and lineman challenge events that we'll be having and competing against other towns, they threw this out today and said, oh no, if you can't play football, maybe we'll move it to the spring. And there's 3 options. Option 1 is if you have to close at a certain date, you can start football this day. Option 2 is if you have to close longer, you can start it at this day. But if you have kids who play spring sports, you can play it this day. Like, again, one of the suggestions early on, flip baseball and football. We knew this in July. Baseball's playing as we speak. Look out the window. There's a softball game happening outside right now. We knew that. And if it's going to be safer to play football in the spring, we could have flipped this in July and not played with these kids' emotions over the last 6 months, including my own family. So I'm sorry, my sympathy for the plight of CIAC is very minimal right now. And yes, I was in the paper saying that at one point, so I'm comfortable saying it now. So I don't know where we stand with regards to spring football. What I can tell you is we're going to move forward with our original football plan of 7v7 and lineman challenge. And if anything else were to change for that and for the betterment of our kids, I will certainly consider it.
Well, I definitely appreciate the district giving these football players an opportunity to at least play in some capacity. To not do anything would just be a total shame. But you kind of touched on my point that I was about to bring up with, you brought up soccer, for instance, and the lack of guidance that is needed for football to be played as football is normally played is very disappointing to me. So, in doing some research, and this is factual, this is just from the Department of Public Health, and that's why I used the words disappointed on the lack of guidance and criteria that is required for football to be played on a normal basis. Football is in a higher risk category according to the Department of Public Health. In this category includes football, wrestling, lacrosse, competitive cheer, and dance. Higher risk, their criteria is close, sustained contact between participants, lack of protective barriers, and respiratory particles being spread. Point blank. That's what the Department of Public Health came out with. Next, you have a lower category called moderate risk. This is what their criteria is for moderate risk sports. Close, sustained contact, but with protective equipment. Find me the difference, seriously, in what the difference is between the higher risk and the moderate risk. That's not much of a criteria to go by. In that moderate risk, you had hockey, soccer, and basketball. If I'm not mistaken, I'm a big sports guy. Soccer, you're rubbing up against other individuals constantly. Because football, I guess football doesn't have protective equipment, because that's the 2 words in the moderate risk that are not in the higher risk. But I find that funny too, because when I look at football players, 90% of them have arm sleeves, they have closed mouth guards. They're more protected and covered than a lot of other athletes. So I'm kind of confused on the whole criteria of why football is being singled out like this. It just and it's a shame too, because these players came to the Department of Public Health and the CIAC both to blame lack of communication. We all know that. They went to both of them and they said, look, we're willing to do what it takes to wear protective gear. We will wear a face mask. If we're linemen, we'll wear a face mask. They came to the table begging. So, again, the lack of criteria in between these 2 categories where hockey, soccer, and basketball can be played, and I love all those sports. I want those sports to be played, but then I'm looking at how football is not being played. I have a hard time finding the difference between them. So that's the sports. It just bugs me. It really does. On a different note, and I can't take credit for this. This came from a member in the community who actually brought up a decent idea. And with the betterment of virtual and distant learning that we've accomplished from spring to fall, and now even moving forward beyond this, the idea of no more snow days has become a hot topic. We shouldn't have no more snow days. Well, the individual also said, well, there should be no more sick days either, essentially. And I don't know what something like that would entail, but it's actually not a bad idea where an individual has the opportunity, if Now, hopefully, we're not doing distant learning because of COVID sometime in the near future, but other sicknesses are still going to exist. If an individual is sick for 2 or 3 days, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to log onto their iPad, continue their work so they don't go back to school on day number 4 and have all this work to catch up on from the 3 days they missed. So I thought that was a really different and kind of brilliant idea, but I don't know what would entail that. And then I do want to give our students and staff a lot of credit for the protocol following that's been going on in our system. I talked to one teacher and one of my baseball kids, and I asked them, how's it going? Are people following the protocols, mask wearing? And they all said, yep, it's not a problem. So that's really good to hear. So I'm happy about that. Now, one more question for you, Mr. Superintendent. This was brought up on, a question was brought up to me in relation to library books. And what was brought to my attention was that parents were receiving bills for school library books that were not returned. Was it possible that some of these books could have been left in desk locker, classrooms, et cetera, when the school was closed in March? And if so, what can we do about that for these parents aren't paying these outrageous bills because that opportunity to return the book wasn't necessarily there?
You hit a lot tonight. You stumped me on that one. I haven't heard that yet, that there's been complaints on the bills, but I can definitely look into that and work with the families to find out more. Obviously, if kids were holding books last March and then didn't return them, that was for good reason, because we weren't allowing them to. So they shouldn't be penalized for that. Now, if they're missing, every case is different, but I will certainly look into that, and I can get back to you on whether, that question hasn't been, this is the first time that question has been raised with me.
Well, thank you for looking into that. And last but not least, to go back to your report a little bit, one thing that I didn't bring up, but you mentioned it, was the lack of staff that's going to quickly shrink due to these contact tracing and people required to self-quarantine and have you not. To me, it seems like this could, when you had to, even if you got a negative test, you still have to self-quarantine. To me, that looks like it could raise a bigger problem than anything else when it comes to the lack of faculty or staff being available. We could have quite a few members of our staff in self-quarantine and put us in a harder bind for.
It's actually a good point, because this came up with area superintendents today. There is a distinct difference between someone that we require to self-quarantine because essentially we're telling them they were in direct close contact, which means they would have to be in quarantine for 14 days. We are getting some staff members who, maybe they don't have a direct contact, maybe they're just concerned for their own safety, and they're going and getting tested anyway, which is their right to do. And then reporting to us saying, I went and got tested, I didn't have any symptoms, I had no reason to get tested other than my own peace of mind, which we certainly appreciate, but I can't come back because I don't have the test results. This is a hypothetical that came up at a conference call with the commissioner. And the commissioner is very clear. In that particular circumstance, that staff member still has to come to work. Like that, we didn't force them to quarantine. They don't have any direct exposure. If they're just going for their own peace of mind to get tested, they don't have to stay out for 14 days till their results come back, because there was no reason to send them initially other than their own peace of mind. Now, clearly it's different if they live with someone who has who is positive, or we sent them home. That's a completely different circumstance. But again, everything is pretty unique in this particular case. But that actually came up in the commissioner's call.
That's all. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Mr. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a comment and a question to you, Superintendent. I guess I'll start with the question because I think it's an easier one to address. It seems that contact tracing, what we're calling it, is difficult and takes a long time and effort. is there an opportunity for any of us to contribute to that effort, or is there some guidelines that, we would be breaking? I would be willing to volunteer time and effort to that cause when necessary.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm not quite sure of the legality of it because you'd have access to student records and privacy issues that we're permitted to have, but as elected officials, I'm not quite sure if you are. And then the other reason, and that's very generous of you, one of the reasons that the contact tracing has, even though it's taking a lot of time, has gone as well as it could is because the person on the other line recognizes the person that's calling them. So for instance, in the Henry Barnard situation, when Jim Graham was calling the parents, people know Principal Graham, people know he has a certain, and not saying none of you don't, but it's even different, like some parent calls I'm not even making because they don't know me and I don't want to scare them even more, like why is the superintendent calling me? So I just would be concerned about why is a board member calling me and telling me to go in self-quarantine. So although I appreciate it, one of the fine lines we're trying to balance is also to try to project some sort of calmness for our families and things. So, but that said, never say never. I mean, if things increase and we're running out of people, I may call you and say, can you guys come in and work a phone bank? Because we just don't know what we're dealing with. So I do appreciate that, but we'd have to check into the legality of it.
Well, the offer stands for this effort or some other effort. So, and then the comment that I would make in general is that I was notified starting last week. I've been advertising for the mentor program for the Enfield schools, and that's getting started again. And it's not going to be in person, it's going to be online. So they're setting up, they're getting signing up people again for the program. Not that we were dropped off, but there wasn't a contribution that we could make because we couldn't visit with the students in person. So I would continue to advocate for anybody that is interested, especially now when we keep referring to, the mental health, the well-being of our students. Many of them could use spending an hour with an adult and providing some of that, what's the word I'm looking for here? Constant contact with an adult that sometimes they don't have. And so I would encourage anybody that's thinking about it to contact the mentor program at the Enfield schools. And it's a very worthwhile effort. And if there's anybody that's thinking about it, I would encourage you to participate in it. That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Salazar. Mr. Ungary.
First, being new to the board, I want to thank everyone here and fellow board members for your kind and warm welcome to me for joining the board. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much. And with that, being new, you need to be provided with materials and the logistics that go along with the position. And I especially want to, Mr. Superintendent, call out the efforts of Kathy Zalicki on your staff, who provided me with all the materials that I needed to kick this off. And she did that. She was just very supportive of that, and so I appreciate all the work that she did, and I wanted to acknowledge that to you and to her publicly. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, ditto, and she's watching, so she's hearing. So hi, Kath.
Thank you, Mr. Ungary. Ms. Costa.
I have no further comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. Ms. LeBlanc.
To Mr. Ungeier's point about Ms. Zalicki, she's kind of the engine, the motor that keeps the engine running around here. I love her. She's amazing. So I'm glad you said that. And I miss not seeing her tonight. So yeah, she's great. Something personal that I did this weekend is I went to the farmer's market here on the town green. If you haven't been here, I recommend you come. It's amazing. So many local crafters, not as many farm stands, but it was really truly amazing, and some local vendors. I spent a lot of money because they had a lot of nice stuff, and I started some Christmas shopping, and I'd like to go back every single Sunday. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that. One of the things I want to put out there tonight, because I know Scott Ryder and I have put out there, is parents want more of these masks. A lot of parents want more of these masks. This has personally become my favorite mask. So as soon as we can start working with schools or letting parents buy some extra ones, it's funny, huh?
As a fundraiser?
Or if parents are just willing to buy them, because some of the kids prefer not to wear them, so the parents have worn them, and now the parents have fallen in love with them. So I just wanted to vocalize that. I know I've already asked you about that. So I am a sports family, and I do have a football player, and I think, anything that we've dealt with these kids has been sad this year. Seniors not having a prom, seniors, not walking down the hill at Enfield High. So there's other things that we could do to make that happen for them. I think taking a sport away from kids is very sad, but the worst part of it is there was just never a good decision. Like when we couldn't have prom and we couldn't have graduation, it was like, we're not going to do this, and this is what we're going to do. We always had a plan. They don't have a plan. I think that they should be ashamed of themselves, quite honestly. It was a very emotional time for the kids. It's hard when the other sports are going on. So to Mr. LeBlanc's point, yeah, it's awful. And when I saw what the CIAC came out today, I felt like they were trying to sell me magic beans, because I can't believe anything they say. And it's another one of these where they're going to get the kids' hopes back up. But think about last winter, I felt like we had a mild winter, but then there's winters, calling snow days up until the middle of March. So that's my take on it. I guess I have a question, since we're talking about sports. Is there anything, through the chair to the superintendent, what are we going to be able to do about drama productions or anything like that? Is that being worked on right now?
Yeah, again, unfortunately, with the guidelines, and I think the key to most athletics is the fact that they're outdoors and we're permitted to do that.
Right.
Obviously, productions and music productions and drama productions are all conducted
Right.
indoors. So we are looking, I know there are people anxiously waiting for that, and I'm asking our music families to just give us some time to figure something out. We
Okay.
want to do something for these kids, we really do. We just don't know what's within the rules.
Right. And, I think, concerts could be televised or, live streamed. I mean, it's not the same as having your parents and your grandparents in the audience, but it's a way for them to display their talents and even perhaps watch it with their family if it's recorded. So I wanted to ask about that. The other thing I wanted to ask about is there's some confusion on attendance, that if you're sick, is it marked as a sick day, or is it, from what I understand, it's marked remote apps or remote present, that you're technically supposed to be in school this day, but you're attending remotely.
As long as the student if they're supposed to be in person or they're home, but they're logged in and the teacher can take attendance for it, that doesn't get counted against.
Okay. And then I happened to see on the news before I came here, so I don't know if you saw it or you've already heard about it, but they're talking about nurses administering quick COVID tests in the school districts. And I know we touched upon that, a quick test versus the full test in your superintendent's report.
I did hear that there's going to be a potential deployment, a potential deployment of tests for school systems. I think Hartford's going to be the first recipient of it. I haven't heard anything definitive on who would administer the test. Would it be us administering the test? What the contents of it, is it a rapid test? Is it I think the thought was, can you identify who's positive right away, like we said with the rapid test earlier? I didn't see that I didn't get an opportunity to see the news, so I haven't heard that, and I haven't, quite honestly, I haven't checked any messages since probably 3 o'clock today.
I would think too, that would bring in a whole subset of getting parental consent, because the parents would have the right of refusal to not allow the district to go ahead and administer these tests. It sounds like it's in the early stages, but it's just something else that we'd have to.
To be honest, the last message I said will go to one of your earlier points is I haven't looked at it yet, but I know Cora O'Connell had set up the infamous Enfield Public Schools online store, because everyone asked, where do you get your shirts and things from? I haven't opened it. I saw he sent it, and it just said, here's the store, check it out. So I will be sending that out, and I know that I asked him to include, and I know he's been speaking with Mr. Ryder with regards to masks, and I know I've gotten requests for masks, so we're well aware of the popularity of our masks.
And then I would like to thank Mrs. Wilcox, for coming out tonight and sitting in our meeting, and the kind words she said about our school district. And thank you for being a staff member with some of our youngest learners. I can imagine that this time is quite challenging, not just for the students, but for the parents. So I thank you for that. And I'd like to take a moment to thank also Liz Davis for coming out tonight. It takes a lot of courage when you're going through something personal to be able to come out and stand up for something that you believe in. So I appreciate her coming out tonight. And I would say my personal experience with hybrid has been positive. I do have a high school student. It was when the school had to close, those were his in-person days. It was nice to be able to streamline right into the remote learning piece of it. I felt like he didn't miss a beat. He's struggling in one class. He was able to set up the Wednesday time with his teacher to meet, and she offered him extra help. The teachers at Enfield High have been wonderful in communicating weekly like they said they were going to do. The expectations are clear, and I really appreciate that type of communication. So if anybody's wondering what's happening at the high school, that's my personal experience at this time. So with that being said, the last thing I want to mention is I have anxiety, I guess is the right word. I'm anxious about the local election, or the election coming up, not the local election, the national election. And there seems to be a very big, there's no tolerance right now, I feel like, there's difference in political parties. And I feel that's definitely trickling down locally. And the civil unrest is growing and growing and growing. And again, I want to touch on what I would love the town and the district to do is, even the board working with the town council, is to come up with a diversity initiative, a diversity pledge on what Enfield wants to stand behind. And in our schools, I would love to see it K through 12, possibly having peer mentors, that the younger kids can relate to. I feel like it could empower the older kids. And I feel that along with diversity, no matter what the results are with the national election, I don't think anything's going to be good the day after the results come out. And that scares me. And as a school district, I want our kids to feel safe. I want our kids to feel heard. I don't know that they always understand what the anger is among the adults when it comes down to politics. And I would just like to see our town come together and create a diversity initiative and a diversity statement to stand behind. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. LeBlanc. Ms. Hall.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, Tina, but I understand that the farmer's market was the last day, last Sunday.
No, they're having one more day, I think at the end of October. They're doing like a big, one of the vendors had told me that at the end of October.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
To bring you up to date, last meeting, I believe I introduced, no, it wasn't the last meeting. One of the earlier meetings, I introduced the idea that 3-year-olds would have to wear masks, which was a change from the Office of Early Childhood, and I have a report. Quote from Jackie Valley about her 3 and 4-year-olds are masked role models of the world. I am quite impressed. Our families are exceptional partners in supporting learning under a hybrid model. When I peek into the classrooms, I see students highly engaged with the environment and their peers, with added distance prompted by visual boundaries made by tape, with tape. The masks have not interfered with their social interactions one bit. That should help, Wendy. Our Microsoft Teams channels are full of pictures, videos, and messages documenting playful learning activities going on at home, which has always been a facet of Head Start, for sure. One practice we have come to love in this very short time is our new arrival and dismissal at the exterior classroom doors. It has helped our kiddos transition easily into school. So there's your positive for tonight. And equally positive but entirely different, the ERFC Distance Learning Center is also proceeding well with a steady increase in parents participating. And they've met their original quota, which was to be possible to continue. They had to have at least 50 parents participating, and that has been a steady number at the moment. And they've been accommodating parent visits by setting up appointments after hours, after 6 o'clock, I believe, is the scheduled time, so that parents can come and see just where their children are participating in this distance learning. There is a YouTube video introducing the Learning Center, and Mr. Dresick is part of that, as is Claire Hall, who runs the RFC. And I have a copy. If anybody's interested, I can email it to you if you'd like to watch it yourselves. As far as Farmers Market is concerned, there's one on Saturday of this week. But it's not the same one. This one is sponsored by ERFC, and it's scheduled from 10 to 4 p.m. on Saturday, October 3rd. It's provided free of charge. You could go in, but if you want to get something, you may have to pay for it. Over 100 community vendors will participate and include farmers, crafts, and food vendors. And on Saturday evening, there is a farm-to-table dinner. The early seating still has a few openings. The later one has been filled, but it is available. It's going to be prepared by Chef Saza of Smoke Barbecue with ingredients from local farms, which is always good. I went last year. It was wonderful. Tickets are still available at www.erfcinc.org. But that's only for the early seating, so don't expect to stay late. That's the one that starts at 4 o'clock. There has been a couple of articles in the newspaper, actually today's newspaper, indicating that masks in the classroom are not good in terms of learning and observing, because you can't see whether you have a smile or a frown. And in one comment in the article on masks said that a teacher had put a picture with her with a smile that she held up every once in a while to show to her students that she, yes, was smiling. The other difference, or distance and difficulty, is on being able to observe pronunciation. So if you are learning a language, like English, for example, you can't see how the pronunciation is visualized. And that has led to masks that are open. But I haven't seen any. The other issue is one that we've actually discussed already this evening, and as that is whether schools will ever be open full-time, even for those schools that are currently planning. The article in today's paper had to do with the New London districts, where the public health unit is suggesting that they not go back full-time. But some of the schools have said, well, we're going to do it for, as John had earlier suggested, for kindergarten through second grade or something like that. But they're backing off slowly and maintaining the hybrid just as we are, which I think is probably the best direction to go at this particular time. With the projections that we're hearing from national health departments, that with the addition of flu, that annual thing that we all get our shots for, in conjunction with COVID, with the possibility of colds that people get in this winter time, or any other problems, health problems, that we're going to have a very serious season coming up that may require us to keep hybrid for longer than just through November. I started positive. Thank you.
Ms. Hall, could you just repeat the farmer, is it this Saturday at the Town Green?
On the Town Green, yes.
ERFC, okay, I just want people to know that it's the ERFC's putting it on, it's from 10 to 4 on the Town Green.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much, just clarifying for the public. Ms. Thurston?
I'll be really quick. All I want to know is if Miss LaValle is watching, I have a building of 80, 90, and 100-year-olds that will not keep their masks on. So if her little guys can come to my place of work and show them how to keep their masks on, I will be truly grateful. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Thurston. Mr. Ryder?
Yes, hi, good evening. I wanted to mention something that Mr. Salazar had said about the mentor program. I've also been in that program for 6 years, I believe. And I wanted to give the contact information. Since Mr. Salazar already spoke about the program and how important it is, I just want to make sure that you had the information. So you can contact the mentor coordinator, Jen Howell. She's at Enfield Public Schools, 860-253-4737, or email jhowell, that's JHOWELL, at EnfieldSchools, plural.org. So I just wanted to mention that quickly. Eli Whitney, PTO, having the first PTO meeting of the year tomorrow night on Zoom at 6 p.m. If you go to the Facebook page, you can find the links to that. Also, I do have an update on the masks. Mrs. LeBlanc and I chat almost all day, every day, and I forgot to tell her that I had a mask update. So I was able to speak with the same vendor that made these exact same attractive masks that many parents and students have felt have done the job and feel comfortable, and it's a fit that they haven't seen with other things they bought. So I'm meeting with the PTO parents this week, Thursday evening on Zoom, and I'm going to I'm asking them to reach out to their families, reach out to their parent friends, see how many they might want. So the PTOs will be offering additional masks, and by the time we get that up and running in a couple of weeks, you might want an extra couple in the house now that you've been wearing the one you've had for a couple of months. So it might be a good time for a refresher, and we'll share that information on enfieldpto.com when we have it. Should have all that sorted out in the next couple of weeks. I was also going to mention the ERFC event this weekend on the Green. And again, that's all day Saturday on the Green is the farmers market, and then at night are the two different dinners that Joyce already spoke of, so thank you for that. I also wanted to remind all of our families that iPad insurance, the deadline was today, but it's been extended until this Friday, October 2nd, end of business. So if getting the insurance for your iPad, which is half the cost that it would be if you went to the Apple store, Apple Care for an iPad 7 is $69. The charge for Enfield Schools, and again, it is optional, but if you choose to get the insurance, which I would recommend, it's $35, and there's also a sliding scale for families that participate in our free and reduced lunch programs. You can pay very simply through your My School Bucks account. I did it myself, or actually my wife did it the day that they posted that. God bless you. And so it's very easy to do through your My School Bucks account. Just a reminder that tomorrow's an early release day. I know tomorrow's also a distance learning Wednesday and you're already home. However, we will still follow an early release schedule. Mr. Drezik sent out a communication about that earlier this afternoon, as did most of the school principals. Speaking of all the school principals, when any school principal from any school, any of our administrators reach out to our families, which they do at least weekly, if not more, You can find every communication from every administrator and any notice that comes from the school district, from the superintendent's office, or from our IT department, or whoever it comes from, on enfieldpto.com/the school that you go to. And if you have students at multiple schools and you're on the HMS site, you just click over to the JFK site and you can get to see the most recent notice from the admin. As board members, we are copied on all those communications. So what I do when I see all of them at any time, day or night, is I drop them over into the website. So they're always there, and then we always tag it on Facebook as well. But I just want to remind people that there is one place that you can go and kind of see everything all in one picture and not have to hunt for different school websites, although those are also fantastic. Thank you, Guy. I also wanted to thank Kite. So in the mail this week, and I don't know if any of the other K2 school liaisons got this, but I got an amazing Hazardville Memorial School picture book that Kite produced for us, and I wanted to thank Kite for that. Basically, it says, welcome to your new school, and there's full color pages. It's a book like this big, and it's a dozen or more pages long, and there's pictures of the principal. This is Mrs. Hunter. This is who you're going to see when you come into the school. This is our vice principal. Here's our library. Here's what our gym looks like. And it was a great little book, and especially the building, where I spent 6 years. Now I have a nice little memento of the building, as if I didn't have a million pictures already in my head. So it's nice to have that. So I want to thank Kite for that. Speaking of Hazardville, they're going to be doing a jogathon event in October, which is something where the kids can run outside and they can be socially distant. They're going to do laps in the backyard. It's a school fundraiser. The info is on the PTO Facebook page. So my son's kindergarten teacher from Hazardville, Mrs. Lisa Dupuy, is ill. And so there's a fundraiser happening on Tuesday, October 6th. It's from 4 to 10 at Pizza Palace, right over here on Route 5. So it's a Tuesday, maybe surprise your family and get takeout. The family's going to get a cut as a fundraiser for what Mrs. Dupuy is going through. And so maybe get takeout on a Tuesday. Might be kind of fun. We do pizza on Fridays at our house, but maybe we're going to go get takeout on Tuesday at Pizza Palace on October 6th between 4 and 10, and mention that you're there for Team Lisa. So I also wanted to thank the folks that came out tonight, Michelle and Liz and Kelly. Thank you for speaking. Mrs. Wilcox, I've known you forever at Hazardville. And thank you for our chats over book fairs and passing in the halls the last couple of years. And so I miss seeing you daily, as well as my other friends at all of our schools. So I just wanted to thank our PTO parent volunteers. Facebook's tough. I'm not going to ask you to ban it, but the PTO parents that are on these pages were getting every single question that they thought should go to Mr. Longier, Mr. Drezik. And so we keep, reminding families, please go to the principals. If you're having a problem, we're not IT either. So they're like, what do I do if my kid's keyboard's not speaking to the iPad? Fortunately, other parents are there, and that's a great resource. So you can say, well, that happened to my son, and here's what we did. But the parent volunteers that run the pages don't have the answers. So please, be kind. Everybody be kinder to each other, and take that note, because these parents don't know the answers either. You're asking other parents your questions that probably should be going to the school building or to Mrs. Wilcox. So I also want to thank the EPS staff, our custodial staff, especially in our buildings and grounds guys. Thank you to our secretaries in the front office. Thank you. You are the first people that greet our parents. And I was at a couple of schools this week because we had an orthodontist appointment. Dad, why did you have to book it the one day I actually go to school? So everybody's great. I want to thank them for continuing to smile, even behind the masks. I can see it in your eyes. Thank you. Especially to all of our classroom teachers and our specialists, our special teachers. It's hard to do PE over Zoom, but the ones that I'm seeing from the two different schools where my kids go, they make it so entertaining. My son, who's 9, and I don't want to tell poor Mr. Crandall this at Eli Whitney, but Elliot just watches him, and he's like, well, he's doing it, Dad. My assignment was to watch this video. And so I had to ask Mr. Crandall if you could say, students, your assignment is to watch this video and to do what I do. So Elliot will just watch Mr. Crandall doing his jumping jacks and having a great time. He needs to be more specific. It's do as I do, not as I say. But also, Mr. Drezick, again, thank you. Mr. Longy, thank you. Thank you, Kathy and Judy, everybody over at Alcorn for keeping us in the loop on all this. And a quick public announcement, public service announcements. This Friday, October 2nd, 9 to 1, there's COVID testing at the senior center in the parking lot. They're going to have like drive-up tents. So if anybody has had a recent concern this week, there is something happening right here in town over on Elm Street, Friday, October 2nd, 9 to 1 at the senior center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. So again, you guys took my thunder again. Mr. Ryder was thanking the whole staff. That was one of my things I was going to say. And just so you know, it's not my dining room you see in the background. We are live in the council chambers. I thank the staff here at the town council for allowing us to come into their building and doing this meeting live. We were the last live meeting in March. March 10th was the last live meeting that happened in this chamber, so it's great to be back. And just a recap of this year, 2020 has just been, since January, we had a feeling this was coming, and between the town manager and the superintendent and the public health director, they've been on top of it. The staff here at Town Hall, the staff at Alcorn. Then we had our meeting on the 10th with the announcement that we could probably, on March 10th, that we could be going out for 2 weeks. We started the packets going. We handed out the packets parents came to Alcorn and picked up packets. 2 weeks turned into another 2 weeks, turned into another 4 weeks, turned into the whole school year. We had events canceled. So it's been hard on everyone. So maybe this is the beginning of some normalcy, that we are back in council chambers and doing a live meeting, and had some public communication. Thank you for all them to come out. But we're not through it yet. But we are working, and with the staff and with everyone and everybody's all their hard work. I've been making more attempts to go into central office and saying hi to everybody and thanking everybody for being there. The summer, all the work they did over the summer to get where we are today, it's just phenomenal. And then, like he said, the tracing they had to do on Sunday, and it was not, well, I'm busy today, I can't do it. No, they picked up the phones, they got the lists, they went in and got the videos if they had to. They did what had to be done, and I just can't. I've always said I have faith in my staff, not my staff, our staff, and they show it every day. They just, you think you got them, and they just raise it to the next level. It's just continued. They're phenomenal. That's all I can say. So with that, I think we'll, please, Mr. LeBlanc.
Through the chairman to the superintendent, it was a question I received after my board member comments, and I think it's a valid one. Someone from the community was asking if there were any plans to maybe consolidate the bus routes, given that the bus numbers seem to be pretty low.
You mean eliminate runs? Is that the question?
Consolidate in some capacity. The individual said that there's been multiple buses that he's seen around town with one or no children on them at the Enfield High parking lot. He was just wondering if there were any plans to look into that and maybe consolidate.
Well, the thing is, we're on a tiered bus system. So if there's not, and this always happens with the high school runs, the ridership is obviously much lower at the high school. But once you start on the high school run, then they go to JFK, and that same bus will then go from JFK to the intermediate schools and to the primary schools. So if you were to consolidate because there's lack of ridership on the Enfield High one, you still have the necessity for that bus for the other run. So I haven't explored consolidating any because, A, we didn't really know, and although people had told us whether or not they were going to use transportation, the reality is if they change their mind and put their kid on a bus, we have to have a seat for them. And to be honest, at this point, it seems to be working where the more buses we have and the less students that are on it, it is an opportunity for us to spread the kids out a little bit better on the buses. So I'm okay with having small bus runs at this point in time, particularly for some of the things that we've dealt with. So I think if this were to continue, it's something that we could certainly explore. But at the present time, no.
Thank you. I think that gave some clarification for sure. And Yankees are up 7-2. So.
I was asked the same question, and I brought it up with Ms. Alaki, and it makes sense that you got to remember that the routes are set by time. Also, they only have X amount of minutes to do the route. If we were to add more to their route, then that would make the route longer, and it would possibly delay kids going into school, because the bus still has to go the same route. There's a set route that they have to go. So if you consolidate 2 runs, that one bus now has to do a longer run, is what I was understood, and it makes sense that just because the bus is empty, that bus still has to go by each house. They have a list of these are all the houses I have to go by. So, but if something changes, we always look into it, and the bus company works with us on that. Got to give credit to the bus company too, for all they've done. They were handed this in the summer and they say, here, this is what I need for the fall, and how they put the schedule together and how they got it going and how they got drivers to do the job is phenomenal. So kudos to our bus company too. And I had kudos to somebody else I forgot, but anyway, let's continue. So we are at number 10, unfinished business. We have none. Number 11, A, approval of 5,000 series first reading. Mr. Salazar.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would actually like to make a motion that we table the approval of the minutes and we add it to the old business for next session. I became aware after, we had our conversation on the policy committee meeting. I didn't understand it then. I understood it later after the fact, that by taking the action that we took and that I led to take, that in fact we removed some policies that were previously in the book, and so I'd like to have the opportunity to review that in committee. And so
I have a motion by Mr. Salazar to table this.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Ryder. Any other discussion? Not sure. Well, do you have a discussion or?
No. Oh, sorry.
I don't know if we do roll.
There's actually no discussion to table.
That's
You
true.
just go right to a roll call, which I can do.
Okay, please. Sorry about that. Please roll call, please.
Okay, so the motion is to table the 5,000 series.
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc?
For.
Mrs. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Ryder?
Yes.
Mr. Salazar?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurston?
Yes.
Mr. Ungary?
Yes.
Mrs. Costa?
Yes.
Mrs. Hall?
Yes.
Chairman Kruzel?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. 11B, approved town council resolutions suspending the facility use policy and use of town-owned buildings. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Hall, seconded by Ms. Costa. This is just a vote that the town council did at their last meeting to suspend any outside users. It's not town users, it's outside users of our buildings. If I'm not.
I understood it as any user of the building that isn't the school or
Yes.
the town employee.
Yes, that's exactly.
And this is just pending the end of this virus, if you will?
Yes.
Was there a date on it? Or it said indefinite, right? I think it just said the word indefinitely, suspended
Yes.
temporarily.
And then
indefinitely.
they'll reenact it, and we'll just have to vote to reenact it then.
Okay, yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that it's still available to people to use.
Yes, that's
down the road. Thank you.
outside, just like you said.
To touch on that point, and I'm for this, but I think it's important that this is reevaluated shortly down the road, given where we are with this virus.
That's the town council would have to take that up.
Yeah. And
Correct. That kind of goes out to them.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And it boils down to just like Ms. LeBlanc asked about drama and all that. If they can't go in and safely use the facilities, why should someone else be allowed to come in and use it? So this is just to eliminate the outside from coming in where the school ain't using them either, so. Any other discussion?
I have one.
Go ahead, Mr. Olmgren.
Well, just one minor thing with regard to the resolution. I just happened to notice this, that it's making reference to a policy that was adopted back in the resolution itself. They referenced the date of July 7th, 2008. However, the resolution doesn't identify the policy itself, the policy number, which is,
Well, it's not our policy, it's a town
I
policy.
understand it's a town policy, but we're referencing the town policy, right? So it's the facility use policy. All I'm saying is the policy number is like 1330. So, but the policy is just not included in the resolution.
If I'm not mistaken, the town doesn't really have policy numbers, they have resolution numbers, so I don't think there is a policy number attached to it.
Yeah, it does read Policy 1330, Use of School and Town Facilities.
Okay, I apologize then. I'm going through.
It's not in the resolution, but it's in the memo.
Okay. But again, it's not, okay, so that's a town policy, 1330.
Right, we're referencing a town policy. We're citing a town policy, but we're not identifying the town policy in the resolution. But somehow we're giving the date. All I was, my only comment would be perhaps adding the policy, the town policy number to the resolution.
To our resolution.
Right, to our resolution, that's all. That
So
way.
resolution suspending the facility use policy number 1330, use of school and town facilities
Correct.
and owned buildings. So that's, we're amending the policy. Any motion on amending the motion, I should say?
I second amending the motion.
So do you first, who did the first? Who first the motion, did I remember? Or did we?
I thought I heard an aye, so.
No, Miss Hall did the first, yes. Miss Hall did the first.
And I can
you did
accept
second.
that as a friendly amendment,
Okay. So Miss Hall amends the policy, and then you,
as long as Mrs. Costa accepts it as friendly amendment as well. Then we don't have to separately vote.
so do we need, so we don't need a separate vote on the amended?
No, not if it's accepted as a friendly amendment.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion? And thank you for adding that. Roll call, please. Save us.
Mr. LeBlanc,
For.
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Ryder,
Yes.
Mr. Salazar,
For.
Mrs. Thurston,
Yes.
Mr. Ungary,
Yes.
Mrs. Costa,
4.
Mrs. Hall,
Yes.
Chairman Kruzel.
Yes. Thank you. Number 12, Board Committee Reports, Curriculum, Mr. LeBlanc.
Alrighty, so we met in curriculum and adjustments were made to 2 courses due to COVID. Those changes made include an added resource to the Child Development Lab 1 and 2. It's a companion website of the textbook that was used in class. The second change was in regards to grade 4 STEAM course in which shared kits were used in the particular course that was called Energy Collisions. So instead of doing that, they switched to, for this year, Earth, Human Impact, and Natural Disasters is the course title. It aligns and supplements all grade 4 science standards. And our next meeting will be October 15th. That will be in person over at the administration offices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Finance, Ms. Costa.
Finance Committee has not met since the last council meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. Policy, Mr. Salazar.
So the policy committee met on the 22nd, just last week. Outcome is what we motioned and discussed a little bit ago. And we are scheduled to meet again on the 20th, although we have identified there's some conflicts. So we'll probably reschedule that date for a new date. I don't have agreement on that new date yet.
Okay. Leadership, we have none. Joint facilities met last week. Refresh my memory. We did. Yeah, it was quick. That's why I can't remember, because it went by so quick. Just to go over the, waiting, yeah, the roof at Barnard is done. They're supposed to start the repointing of the chimney and fixing of the metal stack. That's got to go higher, so it will help the chimney. But other than that, the roof is complete at Barnard. We have a completed roof after 3 phases at Barnard. We are still waiting for state reimbursement, but the paperwork is submitted. And no, I shouldn't say we're waiting for phase 3 reimbursement. Phase 1 and 2, we did get partial reimbursements. They have to audit it and get the final reimbursement, so that should be coming. JFK Building Committee is meeting this Thursday, and all I hear is it's going well. We did meet last week to approve the last phase to go to the state for the technology piece. Joint Security isn't meeting until December, I believe. No. School reopening, I think, is a mute at this point. Maybe I'll just have Kathy remove that at this point, because we are reopened. Hopefully we don't, and if we have to restart it, we will. Joint Security, I know there was an email today that they're going to try to set up a meeting in December. More details to follow. And any other committees? Sensing none. So we move to number 13, approval of minutes, special Board of Ed meeting, September 15th, 2020. This is meeting A. Moved by Ms. Thurston.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. LeBlanc. Any discussion? Show of hands. All 9 in favor. And special Board of Ed meeting minutes, September 15th, 2020, meeting B.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Hall, seconded by Ms. Thurston. Any other discussion? All in favor? I'm assuming 9? Yes, it is. Thank you. 14, approval of accounts and payroll.
We have none.
We have none. 15, correspondence and communications.
Yeah, I do have one thing to say. It's nothing horrible, but I did get a message. It's about the farmers market, so I'll take a minute to clarify.
That's fine.
Miss Preventure, who works for ERFC, she says we have one Saturday on the town green from 10 to 4, and then she said and then the following week it's every Sunday in October.
Oh,
They've changed it.
Yeah, they must have. I mean, it's spectacular, and there are a lot of people here. So that means we can do more Christmas shopping as it gets closer. But so that's my correspondence and communications.
I was just going to add that I got a text that we had 159 people watching on YouTube, so that she must be one of them, or she's watching live on channel 16. So thank you for all you people out there informing us so we can correct the record. So there's no need for executive session. Motion by Ms. Thurston, seconded by Ms. Costa. Any discussion? Again, thank you all for being here. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, ETV, for all the great work.